Good morning, and welcome to the Sherborn Board of Selectmen meeting of January 10th, 2014. Sorry we're a little bit late. We appreciate you viewing in or participating here today. We'll start off with David reading our agenda, draft agenda.
Thank you. First, we'll vote to approve or amend the agenda and add topics not reasonably anticipated by the chair 48 hours in advance. And then a public comment period, and then discussion of town meeting. The first item will be 90 Maple Street, the Gray property. And then we'll review the notices of intent that have come in. Then we'll look at budget and warrant planning. And there is no preliminary model ready for review at this time, which was on the agenda. Talk about upcoming meeting topics, appointment of Ellen Heffern as associate member of the Farm Pond Advisory Committee. And then any selectmen reports, then consideration of minutes and the warrant, and set the next meeting.
Great, thanks. Are there any amendments to the agenda, gentlemen? No? I'll take a motion to approve the agenda as read.
Second.
All in favor? Great. All right, so that brings us to public comment, if anybody has any comments. All quiet this morning. All right, great. So we can just move right along, David, to our first topic here, the 90 Maple Street Gray property.
Okay.
And if you could just give us a brief overview, would that be fair?
Yeah.
And then we'll see how we want to handle that.
Basically, the warrant closed, well, as you know, the last month and a half, we've been accepting preliminary notices of intent. The warrant closed on Monday, so those notices of intent become articles that could be placed on the warrant for the annual town meeting. One of those is the Pulte development on Maple Street, and the property owners are the Gray family. And one way of placing an article or getting an article in front of town meeting is to make the request to the Board of Selectmen directly from the property owner, and that letter of request is in your packet. And then the selectmen have to consider, have to within 14 days refer that to the planning board, and the planning board has 65 days to hold a hearing on it and set up some sort of statement for town meetings consideration. So basically, it doesn't come back to the Board of Selectmen, but the Board of Selectmen would have to refer that request to the planning board. So that's just the one particular article on.
No, understood. So just for clarity, for me, we have the property owner requesting a zoning change, and that's in essence what the warrant article would be seeking. And my understanding was that the property owner has the right to do that directly. And the issue for us today is to decide whether we want to refer that to the planning board for them to then, I guess, put it on the warrant, or we can also decide today to just include it on the warrant. Not to the extent that we're taking any position on it, but just whether or not we would want to include that on the warrant.
You could decide to include the article without
referring it to planning,
actually sponsoring it by the Board of Selectmen, but the law is that the selectmen refer it to planning board within 14 days. So I don't think you have a whole lot of.
So we still have to refer it to the planning anyway.
The process for any zoning amendment is the planning board needs to make a report on that, and the way it gets to them, if they're not originating the article, is we refer to them. I think even if they originated the article, they'd give it to us and we'd give it back to them. So
Yeah, okay.
Either way, it's getting to the planning board. I would move that we refer this to the Sherborn Planning Board.
Second.
Okay. Just for discussion purposes, what I'm trying to understand is how that then gets on the warrant by the planning board, because they have represented that they don't want to sponsor something on this particular topic
Right.
for the warrant.
The Pulte company had originally submitted a notice of intent that we put in an article as a placeholder when we were thinking that the planning board would be sponsoring that article.
Yes.
The planning board decided not to sponsor the article. So the request from the Gray family also came in before the warrant closing. So we just put that as background material for that one placeholder article that was already on there.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to get at is I don't have any problems with I think there's merit to having it on the warrant. I'm not speaking to the merits of the development plan, but just having it on the warrant. And we have representatives of Pulte here. They obviously have planning and so forth that they have to do. So I don't want to keep people up in the air. So, and we have the right to say that we can include it in the warrant, even though we still send it to planning. So I guess I'd like to discuss whether we can amend your motion to still include it in the warrant, and if you're comfortable with that at this stage of the game.
Well, I'm not, because of the reasons stated by the planning board. The planning board didn't want to sponsor the article because they felt they had some jurisdictional role in connection with evaluating it. I see that we have an ongoing role evaluating it also. So if we sponsor it, for all that we say up here that we haven't taken a position on it, the message that gets out to the community.
Yeah, now, I'm not suggesting that we're sponsoring it. In fact, it's my understanding that the Gray family is sponsoring the warrant article.
But the way it's going to get printed, if we vote to put it on the warrant, the way it's going to get printed is Board of Selectmen.
And so what's the other mechanism for them to get it on the warrant, Paul?
The planning board or 10 signatures, which is the way I would prefer them to do it. So it would be proposed by Gray, and 8 others.
And how did we do the one, how was the one in the center of town done last year?
By the planning board.
That was a planning board sponsored article?
That's correct.
Okay, even though they had the review authority there too?
That's right.
Okay.
So there's an inconsistency in practice.
Mm-hmm.
So perhaps
But it's a
they'll
different
change-
board.
Perhaps they'll change their mind.
Yeah, so maybe they will change their mind. But I think all we have to do today is refer it out to the planning board.
Okay.
I'm not saying it shouldn't go on the warrant. I'm just saying, I think, I'd like to see the warrant printed with, instead of saying sponsored by the Board of Selectmen, sponsored by the Gray family.
Well, we're not going to see it sponsored by the planning board, at least based on what I've been told to date.
Right, so we'll see when they get to review it now in substance. They're going to have to make a report in one way or another, so.
But in the meantime, we have a placeholder, and we're now advising the Gray family to go out and seek signatures so that it's a citizen's article. Is that what we're now saying?
That would be my preference.
Well, I mean, the citizens petition is a whole other route. I mean, under state law, once the citizens petition is filed, then you have to act on it within a certain amount of time, and so you would open the warrant and add it in as a citizen petition, but they could do that and have it in their back pocket and come forward with that if for some
Well,
reason.
how would we not be able to say that the placeholder is there for this topic, you see? What I don't want to do is see us do hot potato, and as a result, wind up where, gee, the citizens petition did not get in time for the December, for the January 6th deadline, right? So I think we're within the deadline
I wanted to give
here.
them the time to do it because
Yes.
we've been on notice of this for quite a while.
That's right.
And we've got a slot saved for it in the warrant.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I agree with Paul. I think it's more appropriate to have it go in without, the selectmen's perceived seal of
understand
approval,
that. I
even though we
understand that.
haven't made any decisions and
That's right.
may very well vote to support it or support it in some form.
Right, because again, just to remind ourselves, at least the practice that I've seen, and we'll be discussing when we get into the pile of NOIs that we've got here, that we've put things on without yet taking a position on them, and we'll be doing that today as well. And at some point in the future,
Right.
we're likely to take a position on things.
Well, basically, I mean, the job of the selectmen is to assemble that warrant to go in front of town meeting.
right.
Of
That's
the,
for the
of the
residents.
items that you would expect. So, so there are a number of placeholders in here that we don't exactly have all the information on.
Correct.
So we don't know whether the Board of Selectmen is going to support them or not, and some of them, we don't even know at this time whether they're going to come in and request the Board of Selectmen sponsor them, or are they just going to come in and request the board to support them?
I suppose another way we might do it, and I don't know I don't know offhand what the requirements are for printing up the warrant, but I could conceive of a statement that said the selectmen at the request of the Gray family or at the request of the property owner.
Yeah, I guess
To
I
make
was,
it clear that it's not a selectman-initiated proposal, Paul, and I don't know if you'd be comfortable with that or not. That, to me, makes it clear.
I think that's sort of the last resort. What you're supposed to do legally is either indicate the Board of Selectmen or you indicate the first name of the citizen who's producing it together with 10 others.
That's under a citizen's petition, right? But this I thought was a unique type of approach in that there's a request of a zoning change by the property owner. So let's say we weren't talking about this project, and I wanted to have a zoning change at my property, and I wanted to get a warrant article to have that zoning change put forth. Wouldn't it go under just my name without the Board of
The
Selectmen?
statute has two different, it separately calls out a citizen's petition and a property owner petition for a zoning change under Chapter 48, Section 5. Those are alternate ways of getting something on an agenda. My understanding here was they did this as a property owner, and they're requesting it be put on the warrant at the request of the property owner.
Yeah, so I don't know why in the parentheses it wouldn't say Gray Family Trust or whatever the entity is,
Well,
the citizens.
Well, yeah, and originally, Pulte Corporation submitted that notice of intent thinking that it was going to be picked up as being a sponsored article by somebody.
Yeah,
So that was one way, and then the second way is they have the property owner going the route of under the zoning law, which is referring it to the planning board.
I don't think we have to make any decision on what the warrant says today, so maybe I would
Well,
keep, I would keep
well-
my motion of referring it to the planning board with the understanding we'd then figure out within the next week or so whether we can print it as a selectman at the request of the Gray family,
Well,
which
it-
I would be comfortable with personally, or whether it's got to come back as a citizen's petition.
I would also like to see the statute,
Yeah.
because there's continued reference here to the statute, which is not in front of us, and town
What, Chapter
council-
48, Section 5?
yeah.
Yeah.
Town council says essentially that it either has to be sponsored by the Board of Selectmen or it has to be a citizen article. That's what I read from this memo.
Yeah, that's not the way I read it. I said the Board of Selectmen, I read the Board of Selectmen, may vote to put the article on the warrant as requested by the landowner. And that's what I'd like to see us do even now, even in addition to referring it to the planning board.
So right now, you have a placeholder that originally we had listed on the checklist as Pulte Corporation as being
Oh, I
the part of the
understand that,
submitter.
but the checklist
And
is a
then-
tool, yeah.
And then we we have it listed as citizen-sponsored. I
Well,
know
technically, it's
there,
property owner
Yes,
sponsored.
right.
I think I agree with Peter's reading of what Barbara has said, and also, I know the statute does treat citizens petitions differently from property owner direct submittals. If 10 citizens were to petition the selectmen for this, we would be in the same boat. We'd be referring it to the planning board, and we'd be putting it on the warrant. And so we wouldn't be putting it on the warrant as a selectman article. We'd be putting it on the warrant as a 10-citizen article. I think we
Right.
can do the same here, selectmen at the request of the
Yeah.
property owner.
Yeah.
right.
And I would be comfortable doing it that way, but I agree with Paul. It shouldn't appear in the warrant as if the selectmen originated this article, because we didn't.
No, I agree with that. I think we're all in
And
agreement on that.
And it wouldn't unless you at some point took a vote to sponsor the article.
Right.
And again, which is different than our taking a vote, which we are most likely to do in support or not in support of this, as well as every other article that's on the warrant, because that's
Yeah,
going to come
we'll
later.
have that time.
Yeah,
Right.
so, anyway, yeah, I think we've got enough discussion. I think we're clear. I think we're going to delay a week in terms of just some clarity of the Gray family entity sponsored article versus the signatures, and if in the interim period they get the signatures. Either way, I see no impediment to it being on the warrant, and I think we want to make that clear to the folks from,
Right, and I think we should refer it to
Involved.
the planning board today, too. Just
and so then, now we'll take I'm getting ready to take a vote on the motion, but to the extent I see some folks from Pulte here, and we're in the discussion phase, you have opportunity to discuss, but you're getting a sense of where we're at. I think you have a good understanding. Yes, sir.
So, Reed Blue with Pulte Homes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. At this point in time, I think my only question is whether or not the way that the NOI has been presented is going to be
Technical hang-up or something?
acceptable. In other words, it's done as an owner petition, as opposed to one of the other, what I understand is another alternative to get it on the warrant, which is a citizen petition signed by at least 10 citizens. So my only question then is direction from the board, either this morning or after this meeting, as to whether or not we need to go out and further do what I think of as belt and suspenders.
Yes.
And that is also get a minimum of a 10 citizen signed petition for the change, or whether or not what we've already presented from the landowner is sufficient. As a technicality, I don't want to kind of stub our toe on that going forward.
No, neither do I want to
Thank
see you stub your toe on a technicality. So I think what I'm hearing is that my legal brethren here are interested in having a bit of time to look at the statute on their own, digest it, and then we'll come back with a finalization of that particular piece of it. So I think that's where
Yeah,
we're
but
at.
by the statute, you've submitted this to the planning board, to the selectmen as a article, of a proposal by a property owner to change zoning, and we have an obligation to refer that to the planning board, which we're planning to do. There's a little discussion here in terms of, as a separate matter, how it appears on the warrant, and that's something that we said we would determine by next week, and I would envision it's either going to appear on the warrant as selectmen at the request of the property owner, or it's going to appear on the warrant by virtue of you getting 10 citizens to endorse it, and then it would appear as the property owner supported by the 9 other citizens. But either way, I don't have any question that it's going to end up on the warrant one way or the other.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, absent further discussion, there's a motion that's been put on the table and seconded. All in favor? Great.
So we'll refer that to the planning board.
That goes to the planning board.
You listening, John? I'm listening. Okay, good.
You got your work cut out for you. All right, great. Thanks very much. So now we'll go into the NOIs, okay? In all, what I'd like to do, we have the checklist, but we also have piles of paper. So I want to go through the piles of paper, all right? They're not necessarily in the same order, but the checklist is useful as we move further along. But rather than shuffling the deck, I just like to go through the piles of paper.
And David, when you say recommended articles, you mean these are the ones that should make it through to the warrant, or what's the recommendation?
We had 35, 40 notices of intent that were filed with the office.
Okay.
Some of those, I went through and I said, let's kick this to next year. Can this be kicked to next year? Can we absorb this in the next year's budget? Can we do this in the current year budget? And so there's a list of, not recommended, and there are about 6 or 7 of those. So those are my recommendation of not moving forward into this year's warrant. Okay. So this list, one of those items was the ladder truck that I had on not recommended in this year. And after meeting with the Capital Budget Committee
It's in our
on Monday
pile
night,
here. Yep.
they were expecting to see it there, so I moved it from my not recommended list into the recommended list. But that's recommend to consider, not...
Right, to include in the warrant,
Right,
and it's
right.
up to the taxpayer and all that.
Right, right.
I understand. So I think the way I'd like to play this, if you guys are comfortable, is to just go through in the sequence of the copies that we have with us. And to the extent any of you, and I'll take the first crack of any things, we're not taking any position on these NOIs or the warrant article, the merits of them at this stage of the game. Unless you feel really anxious to do that, we can certainly do that. But for the most part, what I like to do is just, to the extent there are some suggestions of information that would be useful for us to evaluate when it comes time for us to evaluate, that you guys, I'd raise, say, hey, I'd like to be sure we know such and such. And you guys capture that information, and if any of you guys have that same sort of need for information to evaluate the merits of something, that would be great. And to the extent anybody in the audience, because it's ultimately going to go to our voters, have a thought, I'll certainly accept, welcome the input, hopefully it being brief.
And we don't
All right?
have language on some of these either, right?
That's correct, yeah. The
The
language
articles
is
are
in
not put
process.
together, the motions are not put together.
It's really more the substance of what this is.
So when we say the warrant's closed, we mean it's closed in terms of the
new.
the concept of the articles, but we haven't actually closed the warrant because we don't have the language for what's going to be.
No,
voted on.
the warrant was closed. There can be no new articles.
But we haven't
But
approved it.
we haven't
and
approved the
signed it.
language and put it to town meeting, and we
Right,
would
right.
need to do that.
We'll do that
Right, but-
later.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a
You wouldn't,
editing job for the staff, for town council.
Well, it's not
for
editing
us.
when there's absolutely no language for the article. I mean,
Right,
it's,
but-
there's got to be actually something written up.
when somebody's, yeah, when these people are either coming in to request you to sponsor it or request your support for the article, they're going to have the article written up.
Right.
Well, if it's a town board or town committee, I'm perfectly happy to sponsor it. I think there's a big difference between sponsoring an article as requested by the planning board or the agricultural commission, as opposed, because that's the one that, top of my list.
I understand, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just.
And that's an
opposed to-
appointed committee by us, and it all makes good sense.
As
Yeah,
opposed to a new group coming in and saying, oh, by the way, we want to put an article in to do something.
Yeah, I mean, I think the process may have evolved over the years, but I recall when I was on the planning board,
You
we had
submitted
to
the
get
text
language
of the
for
language.
articles in before the warrant closed. It wasn't enough to say, you know, I want a zoning article on X. We would submit the language, and that, as you point out, it would be edited, it would be vetted, it would be considered at a hearing, et cetera. We've got a stack here of requests. We've basically given people sort of a check-the-box opportunity to say, we want to save a place on the warrant.
Right.
I had thought we would have more refined
I don't think we
articles at this
requested
point.
articles and motions.
So maybe something to keep in mind for next year,
That's
because
right.
I think there's no reason after 2 months.
Right.
We can't have more than just amend the purpose of the Agricultural Advisory Commission. Not that there's anything wrong with that
Right.
proposal, it's just how, what, and for
Right.
what reason, and
I think we
and
did
what's it gonna
receive
say.
the wording of the planning board articles.
Good.
Yes.
But that was,
Yeah.
that was it. And in the past, the very last thing that gets refined is the motion, which is the actual thing that means something at,
Right.
at town meeting.
Right, but that's even after
Those
the
are even after the
warrant
warrant's
has been approved
published.
and signed off on, because we actually signed the warrant.
And that has to be
Sometimes
consistent with
we-
what's in the warrant that's
That's
approved.
Has to be within the,
Yeah.
yeah. the
So at this
confines
point,
of-
we've got these sort of vague penumbras of
Yeah,
issues
still,
that we're
still
going to
being
address.
refined, and one could argue that that process is also beneficial to the voters to have that refinement continue to take place before the text is finalized.
Right.
But, so
It
it is,
it
see
is,
how
it's
the
just
process goes. and
we've
how-
been spinning wheels for 2 months.
Yeah,
and some
yeah,
of these are
I hear you.
quite
If
in good
that's-
shape.
I mean, if that's an issue, then there shouldn't be any process for notices of intent. I mean, it should be, you submit your
Warrant
warrant
submission.
article.
Well, so I think what Mike said, and I think it makes good sense to
Yeah.
consider for next year, altering the process a bit, so we're further along on this than we might be.
Right, right.
Still, but still being flexible about changes and so forth.
Yeah, we could do a notice of intent process for a month, and then we could say, okay, you know, to the extent you still want to proceed, then give us your language, and then we can close the warrant
Right.
to new articles
Yeah.
after we get
Yeah.
language.
But take, for
Yeah.
example, the financial things, like the capital items. Sometimes we don't even know what the number
right.
is that people are looking
Yeah.
for until
Right.
February or
understood.
March, you know?
Just following up on Mike's suggestion, why not do that now? And as we review these, this is like the first time.
Yeah, the first time we've seen them.
Systematically looking at these. If we want the language of an article, why don't we say, we'd like the language of the article now? And give people a week or two to submit the language that they want to have.
You don't have any article language in there other than,
I don't want to, I hear what you're saying. I think we got to give a little bit, we know we want the language, but we're also juggling a bunch of balls right now. So to the extent that you're hung up on trying to get language from an agricultural commission at the expense of a budget exercise as well, that's probably, may not help get to the ultimate,
well, I mean, there are three things that are
Go
going
over
on
it.
at the same time. There's developing the warrant, there's developing the budget, and there's developing the capital.
yes.
And
Yeah.
those all converge at some point on the warrant.
So we could put a reasonable date. So David, let's think about that. Let's not come up with it right this moment, but in 20 minutes,
Right.
let's come up with that. So you think about the date. Like, we want
These-
the language within 3 weeks, or 2 weeks, or
Right.
1 week, or,
And normally
6
what you
weeks.
do is over the time, before you actually, vote that final warrant that you want posted, the wording ends up working with town council.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah.
Iron
I
out.
mean,
Yeah, that's
and that's built into the
makes sense.
contract.
And the
with
motion.
them.
I guess I'm looking for something in between what we have and what we'll end up with on the warrant,
Right.
but at least
Right.
Right.
a
So
sense of where
this,
people are
um,
going with this.
Really shouldn't, you're not going to be posting this till end of March.
For
About a
warrant
month before.
finalization. And that will have reflected Barbara's language editing and so
Right,
forth.
so if you did, if you had February 15th, you wanted the articles and draft motions.
Well, I think the motion should be done by town council.
Yeah, just the article language is enough, David.
Okay.
Yeah, I think here's the best way to do it. Before at least 48 hours before they're coming in front of us, we have the article language.
So the
Right.
schedule that we've laid out for bringing these people in, we'll just say you have to bring your article in.
Yeah, but give it to us so we can review it before
Well, in
we
your
meet with
packet,
them.
yeah, for that.
in our
Well,
packet.
that
More than
meeting.
48 hours, a week in advance.
Yeah.
Okay, there you
Yeah.
go. All right, there you go. I'm with that.
Okay,
Yeah.
Yeah, all right.
thanks.
So here's what I'm going to do, is just sort of briefly identify what we're going through in the pile in a Cliff Notes version as I currently have it. Identify things that I would love to see when they come forward before us, in addition to the language, okay? Any thoughts you have, and any thoughts from the crowd here, and we move on to the next one, all right? And I'll try and do it as quickly as possible. So the first one is the Agricultural Advisory Commission, amend what they do. So I don't know what it is they really want to do, except to reinsert the original wording of Agricultural Advisory Commission purposes written by the Department of Agricultural Resource. So I just have a big question mark on what it is that's doing. Not to say anything bad about it, I just want to be smarter about it. The language and the explanation will presumably get us there. I think the supplement that we did at one point in one of our meetings, we had the Agricultural Commission, it was John Dowse, came in and talked about what
Well,
they're up to,
Yeah,
and
they'll,
so forth.
they'll be
So
in to
do that.
discuss this.
But here's the thing, I'd asked a question, he couldn't answer. It seems to me we probably should be able to get, maybe your intern can assist. You have 2 interns still, I think.
Gone.
They're gone. Never mind, in terms of using the intern. But the information I would still like to see. What do we have a farm industry here in the town of Sherborn. There's got to be data available that says, sales volume, number of people employed. Just additional information, because we do support the agricultural industry here in town. It'd just be nice to know how successful we are with it, or how it's going. So that was a question I'd had for John before. He didn't really know much. It seems to me there's stuff out there, whether it's federal information or whatever. So those are my thoughts on this one.
I just want to see the language. I think it's
Yes.
probably a great idea, but it's hard to
Language.
tell from this
That's right.
what the effect of this article would be, so.
Right,
My comment is I think it's a good idea,
good.
but I agree with Mike that you can't put on the warrant an article that says to amend the purposes without telling the voters
That's right.
what we're doing.
That's right, that's right. The next one I have is the placeholder for permitting the Brewfest to occur without conflict. Charge the bylaw restaurant to change the bylaw for restaurants to include some instance where outside music can happen. I guess is the
This
substance of
article,
that, so.
the planning board had voted
That's
not
your
not
writing.
to
I'm
bring
reading.
forward.
You should have been a doctor.
That is not my writing.
That's not your writing?
You could not read that, no.
Oh,
It's Gino.
it's Gino's, okay.
Yeah, that's Gene.
Oh, it's Jeannie's.
Jeannie should have been a doctor.
I went to Catholic school.
You've
that,
forgotten everything you learned.
That's why.
So that article, the planning board voted not to bring forward. That article has no sponsor.
This one?
So
Okay.
either we keep it and we look for a sponsor, or we get rid of it, or
And we could be the sponsor.
or you'd be the sponsor.
Or the Sherborn Business Association could be the sponsor,
They
which
could be the
is
sponsor too.
sort of the benefited party from this concept.
I would say if the planning board is not willing to sponsor it, then I don't think we should. I want to be consistent.
But you can just let it, you don't have to vote on it, so you can just let it sit there and
Well, so what it is for it to, I would say we're not saying it's off.
Right.
It's still in play, but it needs a sponsor. And the question is where that sponsorship
Right.
comes
But
from.
we did,
And,
we put it on
We
there
have-
thinking that there was.
This was an
going
issue
to be
that
a
the Board of
sponsor.
Appeals
understood.
has asked to have fixed in our town's zoning bylaw, and it's an issue that the Board of Appeals has suggested to the Sherborn Business Association, which is the party that would benefit because of their
Yes.
brewfest, that they would be, advised or interested in pushing it forward. I'd suggested to David that we reserve a spot for it.
Yes.
I think Gino might have even started drafting conceptual language, but I don't know that we need to be the party that advances this if the business association isn't going to step up and do that.
Well, as a former member of the planning board, I can see planning concerns here. That is, if you write language, you may be intending to benefit just the Brewfest, but the language has to be
It
generic
couldn't be just the
enough.
Brewfest. It'd have to be broad enough to allow,
It has to be generic, and that could produce unintended consequences elsewhere in the town,
which is why you'd want really good language.
which maybe that's why the planning board decided this goes too far. So
Yeah, I don't
we'd
know.
really need to
Well-
hear from the,
And just before we
I
do,
see the
yeah,
planning
before we do.
board
But
chair
what,
is
why
gone.
can't the zoning board put this for?
They have an ineffectual chairman.
Okay, that answers that. Grace, and are you speaking as a planning board member?
I was present at the conversation.
Okay.
Only an associate. There was
Only.
question about whether they agreed, whether there was a need for a conversation about a different venue for what had become a very, very large event. So that the questioning was deeper than you may realize.
Can't hear.
I'm sorry.
The questioning was about
This-
whether there might be an alternative venue as opposed to the current place that it's being held.
Because it's become so large. Yep.
Yeah, in passing, there was mention of Laurel Farm and tent.
Which puts it on the town property and all those other,
And-
I believe there was another issue on whether it was right to do it just for one business or the number of.
But that's all. But the most serious new item was simply that it's so successful, and there's a lot of support for it, but it's gotten very big for the spot.
Right. There's another issue, and it kind of follows from what Paul's saying. I don't think it would necessarily be confined to that one event, but we've also had, and this follows up on the agricultural discussion too, we've had, for example, Silverwood Farms has come into the zoning board and asked about using their place for similar type events, whether it's a charitable event or somebody wants to get married and has some affiliation there that's not a family member, things like that. And so the question for the town really is, are we open to allowing occasional outdoor events like that with, with entertainment, music, or are we not? And in the case of a farming endeavor, that might be something that was, helpful in terms of their business. It might be something that was really annoying to neighbors, and who knows? And we had the same issue with the Brewfest. And of course, the town does have parties of various sorts on holidays and otherwise, where they have music and they have outdoor venues. So there's a little bit of a different standard depending on who's putting forward the request and where it's being held.
all right. Susan Tyler.
Question regarding this, it seems like you've got an article, but you're not sure who's going to sponsor. Is this something that can be turned over to a citizen's petition, like you were talking earlier about the Pulteys? If you get 10 signatures,
Well, anything can be done by, quite possibly, I think, on this one. I think, really, Mike is suggesting the placeholder and who's picking it up and running with the ball, so the Sherborn Business Association could be one of those that does the citizen's petition approach. I think we'd be open to that.
But we'd want language, we'd want something.
Absolutely, the language is
That's
the
the
key.
key thing about the citizen petitioner. The problem with the citizen petition is it has to go on the warrant just the way it's written.
Verbatim, yeah.
And I'm concerned, again, as a former planning board member, of the unintended consequences. So you say, this is a great festival, the Brew Fest. I support it 100%. I've been to every one of them. They're great. But does that mean there's going to be a Brew Fest everywhere in town? What is the language actually going to say? That's the critical piece. And so before this article goes forward, some very clever person has got to figure out a way to do it.
Right.
The issue to me isn't how does it get on the warrant. The issue is what is the solution that would work, that satisfy the Board of Appeals, yet not open the floodgates so that we're having neighbors come in here yelling at us that the character of the community has been destroyed and things are happening all over
So this
town.
might be one that drops out this year, too.
That's right.
We don't know.
If it doesn't move forward. Jeannie, yes.
I just want to point out that the only issue with this is the outdoor entertainment. They can have the Brew Fest. They just can't, right now, with the zoning bylaw, have outdoor entertainment. So
At a place with a restaurant license.
right. So if they eliminated the outdoor entertainment, the Brew Fest can still go on at the Sherborn Inn. So that was one thing I did want to
But there'd be
point
no
out.
music. There'd just
If
be
there's
people
no
drinking
outdoor
beer.
entertainment, because we know how much.
Tasting
Noisy, though.
It's tasting beer.
So that's, I just wanted to point that out.
All right, well, this isn't dead, but it's,
Unless
that's right.
it's staggering down the street.
Yeah, but because you asked for it, it remains in the recommended articles pile. How's that? We have, David, we have the personnel administration plan.
I think you had one question, Peter.
Oh, I did another one. Oh, sorry, Bob.
That's okay. The Christmas pageant that's done on Western Avenue at the Downing place, isn't that sort of the same thing?
Well, they're not a restaurant. I think that's one of the keys, is it's a licensed restaurant where this is taking place. Okay. And that's private property. Yeah. My son, who's now 22, was the baby Jesus many years ago. That's his claim to acting fame.
Well, I assume he's very,
Well, he's got an aura about him, but I don't know if it's a good one. I love him, though. He's my favorite son. How's that? Sorry, Pedro. So, David, what are we doing with this one now, just briefly?
At last year's town meeting, there was a vote to place Lieutenant Bento, create the lieutenant position at the police department, and that created the position within the personnel admin plan. What that didn't do was authorize the selectmen to be able to sign a contract with that person.
Okay.
Exempt that person
All
under
right.
certain things. So there are 3 articles here that town council needs to come in and discuss with you about
well,
Yeah,
how that needs
I
to
have a
move
big
forward.
concern about this article. First, that already the Board of Selectmen has the power to enter into contracts. This article, as presented, is only to authorize the Board of Selectmen to enter into all kinds of contracts. And I think the intent was employment contracts.
Right.
But because it's not limited, this either is redundant of the general laws or is doing something that has unintended consequences.
What's you reading from? Because I don't have that.
I'm reading from Chapter 3 of the general bylaws. This
Okay,
one
got
right
it.
here.
I was on the wrong page. Thank
Yep.
you.
There already is a general law that says that we can enter into contracts. We're the contracting authority for the town generally. So if this is way too broad, the Board of Selectmen is authorized to enter into contracts on behalf of the town for the exercise of the town's corporate powers for all matters within the jurisdiction of the Board of Selectmen on such blah, blah, blah. If the intent is to take care of Lieutenant Bento, and I do want to take care of Lieutenant Bento, this has nothing to do with, I'm basically making the same argument that I made on the last article of unintended consequences.
Well, these are.
If we want to authorize a contract for a lieutenant, why don't we say the Board of Selectmen is authorized to enter into a contract, an employment contract for
Any position established by town meeting or something like
Yes,
that.
yes.
Yeah, and so that's all the language clarity that Barbara's going to come forward with, and I
Right,
think
it'll
you
be,
said that, yeah.
it'll be Chris Brown from Town Council.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
And he has, he needs to discuss all three of those
But,
items.
but that's what this is about, that snag we had with entering into that contract.
I
This
agree with
clarifies
Paul.
it. I
For
get
that snag, this seems like pretty broad language.
Pretty broad,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
right. And here, the next one is just further a bit more, the enable the town to enter into that, and how that's different than, how that doesn't accomplish what the one we just discussed.
But the problem with this is
It's
the
specific.
bylaw says that we can't, actually, isn't it state law that says we can't?
Other than for a police chief, fire chief,
Right, it's state law.
administrators.
So even if we adopt all these things, we couldn't do a contract. We'd have to do a home rule.
I thought we did didn't we do the state law last year, or not?
No,
Okay.
not for this. This is gonna be some work to get this done, because it doesn't happen in very many places that.
There's not a lot of precedent set for this type of thing.
Right, to enter into a contract. So what the three things are, that need to be approved is that it has to give the selectmen authorization to enter into an employment agreement with somebody below those positions that are provided for in state law.
Yeah,
And I think what town council might have told me was that it doesn't specifically prohibit the selectmen from doing it, but there's no local.
yeah, I remember that
Something like
conversation,
that.
yeah,
And then there's the approval of the contract itself.
which this is, that we're
Right.
just talking about.
And then there's approval of exempting that position from certain
Yeah, I think that's later in the
items
pile there
personnel
somewhere.
admin plan.
Yeah, okay.
So
And
those
is that
three-
what requires the state action?
There was nothing in the town council opinion that required state action.
Okay, so Paul's got a different view, though, so
I have
want to hear about that.
a different view.
Yeah.
There are specific statutes that say you can have multi-year contracts for certain people.
Yes.
And Department of Revenue has taken the position that unless you are in one of those categories, you can do a contract, but it has to be for 1 year. It has to end, and it's subject to appropriation by town meeting. Because unless you have authority from the general court to go beyond 1 year and bind future town meetings, you can't do it.
So maybe this is a discussion you need to have with Barbara or Chris Brown before we take this much further, because if that's the case, we could pass all these things at town meeting and still be in a pickle because we didn't request legislative authority.
They are coming in to speak with
Discuss
all.
this.
Yeah, but it might be good for
Yes.
Paul to give them a heads up about what he's concerned about, so they at least have a chance to respond.
We spent a lot of energy, I think, on prior town council regard to the police chief's contract.
Yeah.
The chief wanted a 5-year contract.
I remember that, yeah.
And state law said 3 years, and we had all these arguments. Well, if it's not, it doesn't say you're prohibited from doing more than 3 years. So at the end of the day, state law says you can do up to 3 years. And when state law seems so specific,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the thing is, we made a commitment to Lieutenant Bento. We refer to him as Lieutenant Bento. We appointed him as Lieutenant Bento. So we have to figure out a way to get the words right to satisfy you through legal
do a home
counsel.
rule petition, and
And you think that's, yeah, so David, you're getting that, and so really, this topic, these
David
two
might not
or
be getting
three.
that, so.
Yeah. These 2 or 3, David, are really, Paul, and I think Mike's suggestion that Paul talking to Chris Brown, make sure we get it just right, so we don't stumble on this for another year here.
I didn't include town council's opinion in this.
That's okay. It
That's-
sounds
that's
like
all
town
right.
council's opinion has been, understood and is being questioned, or
Right,
at
right.
least there needs to be further discussion.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good, okay. Now we have an interesting one from the planning board, which is 3 articles, and Gino's taken a draft, and so the only question I have on this, there's 3 articles. One talks about establishing medical marijuana facility. Another one talks about lighting as nuisances. Another one talks about some FEMA flood insurance map clarity of the language or something. So the only question I have on this pile, besides further understanding the second and third one, is why we even are going where we're going with this medical marijuana stuff.
Yeah, on that one, we met with Gino Carlucci and I think John Higley, and they said they were not going to do something on marijuana. So that was within the period of time where the notices of intent were being discussed. And then all of a sudden, just by the deadline for the submission of articles, we get what sounds to me like a 180-degree
Turn.
Look at the last two pages, though, and I wonder if this is it on the warrant notice of intent, or I guess it's the third page back. The Attorney General has ruled that towns may not ban such facilities. Failure to have rules for them could leave the town vulnerable to locating anywhere in town.
Well, that was my point. I mean, I had sent several requests to the, we had enacted a moratorium, and the Attorney General approved the moratorium on these facilities on the grounds that the Planning Board was undertaking planning studies to figure out what to do with medical marijuana. So when we had the meeting here and the Planning Board said, we're not doing anything on medical marijuana, afterwards, I was of concern that we had represented
Right.
to the state that we were planning something,
Right.
which turned out to be nothing. And then we have this, which I mean, I'm fine with it as far as that goes. I've sent the Planning Board some information about what other towns are doing about this. In particular, Carlisle has got a committee that's been looking at medical marijuana facilities, and they've come up with a lot of work and a lot of analysis of what the issues are and what kind of things they might be able to require. And I've sent all that to the Planning Board. I don't know if it was any use to them or not, and whether that might have had any effect on this, but
Well,
maybe
so
Grace knows how this
Yeah.
came.
I think this is based on a bylaw that exists elsewhere, and I cannot remember where.
The wording and
it
so
came
forth.
from.
But-
It was not generated, it was edited here from the original, but it was not generated here.
But so I guess the takeaway is this is more of a defensive maneuver here.
Absolutely, I think
And-
it's an agreement with your original statement, Paul, that once you've got the moratorium, you've got to do something, or else it can just come in.
Yeah, although there has to still be state approval of the dispensaries and
Yes.
limiting the numbers per county, and so
Yeah.
we're probably less at risk than we would be with some other things, yeah.
Yeah, see, my concern is that people, here we had Spandy asked last town meeting, let's prevent this from happening forevermore in the town of Sherborn, and so we have no whiff of it, if you will. Ha ha. And so, and here we are putting a bylaw that outlines the rules under which one may come into town, and
It's
I mean, the
yes,
scary part about this,
It
to
just
me, looking at
brought-
this, is it could be anywhere in town,
yeah.
which, or on any main street, which is effectively anywhere in town.
Yeah, so it's just understanding why we're doing it, what we're doing, and then the pitfalls of what may lurk in there, because I sure didn't read through this thing and, what on earth are we doing? And we're not here to discuss the merits, I'm just saying, there's a whole bunch of question marks that will be raised when the conversation takes place.
Two questions, is one, is there need for the town to defend itself by trying to regulate?
Right.
And second of all, are these the words?
Right, so hopefully that clarity will come forth when we're having to
I think-
deal with this.
I think the planning board felt there was a need to have something, and I think that there's a lot of conversation to be had about whether these are the right rules.
But why the change when they said they didn't?
I don't know. It showed up at a meeting. I have no idea what private conversations took place.
That's all right, I changed my mind on it.
My 2 cents is if the Planning Board wants an article
I
on
agree with that,
a
yeah,
zoning article,
And
they're the
I
town planners.
understand their belief that the
Yeah,
town needs it,
yeah.
but-
yeah.
So this is.
I'm
gotta
always
go on.
supportive, I've always been supportive of what the planning board wants to do, so I think you're absolutely right on that, Paul.
But on the issue of the language, I agree with what Mike just said. I don't want these facilities all over the place, next to anybody.
Yeah, just put them out.
There should be more than just wide open. The whole point is that we're wide open now, and we're going to be wide open afterwards. The only difference is that now you've got to go to town meeting.
I saw the language a long time ago. At the time, it seemed to be restrictive. I'm not questioning your judgment about what it does.
But at any rate, at the state level, we're awarding these things very soon, in the next 2 weeks, I think, like on the 14th of January. So this round, it's going to use up a lot of what's been authorized.
Yeah.
Right, yes, Michael Lee.
Language in that is currently proposed that has a distance regulation around from school buildings.
There is in the state act that was passed by the voters, so whether they put that in here or not, there is.
There's a 500-foot setback on this at this point with a question mark after it as if they were considering it. A minimum of 500 feet from any residence or any school or other location where children congregate.
Okay.
It's not that far.
Doesn't make many spots in town that isn't 500 feet from a residence, right?
There are spots in town that aren't 500 feet from residence, that's true. Plenty of them. 500 feet's not very far.
Okay. Any further on this one? The zoning?
No, I think as the planning board is sponsoring it, that they're an elected board, that they're charged by the general
That's right.
laws with this responsibility.
Yep, okay. Next one I have is the governance task force asking for 2 placeholders. And so there's one where, I don't know if we've already scheduled them or have a rough schedule, but certainly by the time they're scheduled, they're still figuring out what they want to do there, right?
And are they saying 2 articles or at least 2 articles? What's the?
2 articles.
Okay. I'd heard 3 at one point, so it's
No,
2.
it's 2. One is probably an approval for a special act, and the other one is probably a bylaw change.
All right, and they're just going to combine all the bylaw changes into 1 article.
Yeah.
Okay. Then we have this farm pond plant and phosphorus evaluation and other nastiness that may be going on there, David, and you're dealing with that. So that one, just you could give us the Cliff Notes version of what we're looking at here?
Basically, the standard operating, if you had a facility like Farm Pond, that there would be some sort of plan, like a management plan of the lake that would do a baseline testing of whatever bad things are in there, study why it closes in the summer, and so you could predict those kind of things, and also study the perimeter of the pond and be able to work with the abutters that there's some sort of plan on what is healthy for the pond, because if the pond gets outside things in it and it closes more often, or it's covered with milfoil, you're going to be incurring a cost to be cleaning the milfoil up. It's going to affect property values. So Farm Pond Advisory Committee has, I think for a few years, wanted to get something off the ground for a farm pond lake management plan. And the first step on that, we issued an RFQ for requests for qualifications from engineering firms. We had about 30 or 40 interested parties in that. We had only 2 submit their qualifications, but the rest were interested. So Farm Pond Advisory Committee is reviewing those qualifications right now, and they were going to make a recommendation to me on which one to go with.
Yep.
One of those companies we've already been working with, which is Norfolk Graham. So then this engineering firm that we hire would be the company that we work with in developing the full RFP for a lake management plan. But that stage we would not do until there was funding approved.
And so what we have in here is 25,000 for town meeting approval for this plan that you're describing.
Right, and right now, the estimate was from 10 to 25 is what we got from other
you're on the
towns
high
that
side,
had
yeah.
similar management plans.
Yeah.
Just a couple of comments. One, the pond used to be owned by the state, and we were able, through negotiations with DCAM and with the governor and so on, to get the pond turned over to the town of Sherborn. And as part of those discussions, it was mentioned, and it is the responsible thing to do, that the town would be a better steward for this pond than the state. And part of good stewardship is to do a study. And although there have been a variety of targeted studies, some by volunteers, one by a professor at Wellesley College, and so on. This is like the first real study of some of the threats
By
to
the town, yeah.
to the pond. So it is the responsible thing to do, and it would be nice to have this done so that we can reassure the governor and DCAM that indeed their expectations of our good stewardship is in fact being met.
I mean, I think it's a great idea. It's a really good idea. I'm just surprised to not have known anything about the RFP or any of the rest of this process. And I don't know if that was discussed before I got on the board or if it's just.
No, this is new to me
So that-
too.
I mean, just in the future, I'd rather be more in the loop on stuff like that,
Right.
particularly where the Farm Pond Advisory Committee's an advisory committee to the Board of Selectmen.
Right.
Right.
I think you were a member of the Farm Pond Advisory
I
Committee
was
at one
for
point.
many
in there.
years, yes.
Well, I think the selectmen had told me at one time they were advising me, and that's what I acted on.
Oh, that's
was-
okay.
yeah.
No, I think this is good.
I think the ball's moving in the right direction, David.
Right.
I do think stuff like this, particularly since we get questions and I would have had, if somebody asked me, what's the story with this RFP, I would have had no idea what they were talking
Me
about.
too. Right.
But the other comment I would make is the amount requested, why can't we raise that from the farm pond revenues as opposed to
Good
going to
idea.
the taxpayers on
You,
this?
you could, if you want to bang it on the sticker, yeah.
So those are all types of questions, you know, are there alternative ways to fund this? The state, you know, can we tap the state for funds on something like this? I don't know, you know, private funding is a possibility because there are people that certainly benefit by that, and that's a great idea there.
Right.
So those are things when we deal with this, that hopefully the Farm Pond Advisory Committee has some answers to those types of questions.
I think in the past, for those types of capital items, they've come to the town, which they could start building it into the stickers and try to get it into their
Well,
funds.
if you assume, for example, that the town borrowed the money as part of an ongoing project, and you amortize it over a number of years, the cost per year could be, let's say, $5,000.
Right.
You take that $5,000 and you put a surcharge on the sticker price for the farm pond admission. So let's say it's $100 to get in, and then there'll be $100 plus $2 that goes to the fund for the study for.
And we
Yeah.
determined the sticker
Yes.
price.
Yeah, it'll be a little more than $2 over, with those numbers, but yeah, I agree with you. It might be
Yeah.
$10, and so what? That's not
The
an
advisory
unreasonable
committee is
amount
discussing
for an annual sticker.
Increases.
a recommendation in the
On the
fee
fee
from
structure.
Monday night. They're discussing that. Also, I would hope to get it down much lower than the 25, but we won't know for sure until we speak with the engineer.
And so then we have a management plan. That doesn't contemplate, and presumably from that plan, we would then have a sense of
What needs to be
ongoing
done.
management
Right.
and the related cost of that, which goes right back into this fee structure as well, I think, you know?
Well, I think it's essential that we deal with the issue of closure of the pond on the hot days of the summer. That, for whatever reason, whether it's
Yeah, the
geese
geese,
or
yeah.
too many people, I heard anecdotally that there was like 1,000 people at the pond on a particular day. Is that true, Pat, 1,000 people at the pond on a particular day?
No.
Sure about the numbers, but
Yeah.
I have another point that, if I may.
Absolutely, Pat. Member of the Farm Pond Advisory Committee for
Chair.
more than 1 year, and you're the chair, is that right? Yeah? No.
Just one point to remember, there are two different concepts here. Farm pond, under the control of the selectmen, really benefits and is part of the whole town. The stickers are for users of the pond, and I think you gotta keep capital things for the, you know, that go on at the pond slightly different from the user fees down there, because the whole town benefits from.
A good point. No, I understand. So all that will come forth when we have our
Right.
discussion,
Right.
but
I mean,
you
but
get a gist of the
increasing
issues here.
saying that the users should pay for, should contribute towards capital type things, maybe not the way to go.
Understood, that's a value judgment, and that's
Right.
a good conversation to have.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, and the counter to that is that some of the people who buy stickers are not town residents, so their tax dollars are not supporting
Right.
the capital projects and other things that happen with
Right.
the town. And so this would be a way, at least for the out-of-town residents who buy stickers, which we've done as a revenue-raising mechanism, to contribute a little more to that.
Right.
Well, you have to be careful with that.
Peter, what
Yes.
about the people who live on the pond? Or is their assessed valuations sufficient?
Well, if I were one of them, I'd suggest that, I would make that argument, but at the same time, that is a question, private fundraising, the people that benefit by the valuation and the work, and also the fact that, that the evaluation may suggest, geez, you probably ought not to put fertilizer on your grass because the phosphorus is coming in, it's feeding the, the bad stuff that's
But
in
that's
there.
gonna be
and so
part of
forth.
the
That's part of the
management
management plan.
I mean, some
Yeah.
towns have very strict,
Yeah.
maintenance and other requirements for, no clearing, all kinds of stuff. We seem to have gotten away from that to some
Yeah,
extent.
yeah, so it'll be helpful for us to be smarter, this process will be useful. All right, we good on this now, move on to the
Yeah.
next one in the pile. This is Personnel Administration Plan, this is the third leg of the stool related to what we were talking about earlier with the lieutenant's issue, right? Okay. We have the Pine Hill School capital request, and on, and we went through this exercise last year. They're taking it a year at a time. They have, asking for $112,000 roughly, which is part of their, right here, Paul.
Yes, I'm 100% in favor of this
Yeah.
because this was in part my request that they divide this into a number of years. And if we don't maintain the schools, then we will find ourselves having to build a new school for $50 million as
Yeah.
opposed to $100,000 of annual investment. So it's, what's the saying, penny
Penny wise, pound foolish. Yeah,
If you
absolutely.
don't do this, the schools will deteriorate rapidly.
Right, so.
There's also penny saved, penny earned.
There you go, there you go.
There's a
So
slogan
there's
for
two
everything.
competing penny slogans.
I'm stuck between a couple of bad nickels here, I don't know. Yeah, no, absolutely. So the things that I'll certainly be asking about when this comes forward is to ensure, one of the things that popped up last year, they first had a $300,000 need for last year, and it got whittled down to $250 or something less, because a number of items were maintenance as opposed to capitalizable items. And then the question became, okay, do you have the maintenance items in your maintenance budget? And last year was unclear that they did. So there was items that had been identified over this 5 and 20-year plan that needed to be done that weren't funded in their operating budget, nor was it funded in the capital budget. I had a brief conversation with the superintendent about that, and he tells me that the budgets, both for this as well as I think at the regional schools, we have that in front of us as well, have factored in the maintenance portion of this 5-year plan. So that's reassuring from him. We'll certainly be asking that question, validating that when it comes forward.
Yeah,
Michael?
Is there a one or two word or two sentence explanation of what is maintenance versus what is capital?
Well, the capital items, there's two ways to deal with it. One is, can the item be bonded? And so the treasurer has input on that. But otherwise, the town's capital policy is items that are $10,000 or more in cost and with a 5-year or more life. That's town bylaw. And so there were items in there, for example, painting sidewalk line, parking lines and so forth, that would be a maintenance item. No,
I'm trying to get at that distinction, having
yeah.
been intimately involved in our
in the
own
region. Yeah.
process. Plus, we have to balance multiple towns' definitions of the
Understood.
region.
Yeah, I don't know what their capital policy is, but
Yeah.
it's two different things. And what got kicked out was actually, what was really kicked out was what could be bonded or not bonded. according to our treasurer here for the Pine Hill item. Now, how that works for the region, whether the two towns are subject to the same bonding rules and regulations, you would think so, but I don't know.
I think it, deferring to Paul, but I think it's consistent for all entities in the state, right?
Yeah,
The same rules.
so,
The bonding rules are,
Yes,
yes.
yeah.
and you have a treasurer at the region. You do,
Yes.
I mean,
So,
and we pay for that treasurer.
I know.
So the one question here is what equipment is and sort of how that fits in here.
They'll have a list.
Well, I noticed they described assistive technology for the auditorium.
This is the,
Private funding.
That was privately funded, I understand, but is that the kind of equipment they're talking about? In other words, is it actually equipment used in maintaining the school? Is it equipment used?
No, it could be anything from doorways, replacement of doors.
That's not equipment.
Replacement of
That's-
windows.
that's
No,
my
but
point.
that's still
there was a
structural
study
stuff.
that was done, and it had all the projects listed, and they wanted to get the money all up front, like 20 years.
Yeah,
worth of projects.
I remember that. I guess my point is there's a difference between maintenance of the building and preserving the building and improving and replacing items in the building and the word equipment, which to me implies
That's one
something a little
element
bit different. And I'm wondering if the equipment is properly part of
What's
an
missing
article.
here is the study, and the study has year one, year two, and then has a list of what they wanted. It's just not here before.
Yeah, I understand. I just like more definition of what the equipment is. And
And that will be-
and why it's equipment that goes to the usable life of the building rather than something else.
No, they have different lives for different items purchased in this, being replaced or repaired under this 5 and 20-year plan that they have, so this study. So there could be equipment, as you say, it could be replacement of, a stove, and they've identified that in year 3. And so, another year, next year's capital request would include that stove in it. This year's capital request may include light. Now, do you call that equipment, or what, the definition? I think, this is just an NOI here.
Yeah, the word's a
but
little
the
vague is my
specifics. Yeah,
point. I
get
can't tell
you.
what equipment means.
I
If it's
get
a
you.
playground equipment or a vacuum cleaner.
Yeah, I think we'll be overwhelmed with the degree of detail that we'll get from the Frank Hesses of the world on this
But to
item.
follow up on one of the things that Mike said, we have in this room this hearing-assisted device that enables some of our hearing-challenged people to participate in our meetings here. That is being installed at Pine Hill, and I believe it's being installed at the region,
Ours was, if I recollect correctly, gifted.
as was this.
Yeah.
They've secured private funding for this, and one of the things they want to do is to install it, the actual installation piece, and they're trying to work to see if the utilities will do it, and they're looking for grants and all that kind of stuff. I'm just singling that piece out because that's an issue near and dear to my heart, and I think the boards. We want all our citizens to be able to participate in activities at Pine Hill and at the region. And we have our town meetings at the regional
Lindquist, yeah.
facility, Lindquist Commons. If we can get that up and running at the region, hopefully we'll have better participation and people who can hear what's going on and contribute their thoughts to our process.
I'd be happy to bring that thought back to Steve and to Chris and acting on the gentleman who also oversees the buildings at the moment.
Thank you.
Ralph.
Yeah. Okay, we're good on this one. Next one? Yeah, sorry.
I just wanted to say we have the fire chief here, and so I just wanted to see.
Oh, he's in a, okay, yes.
Since these aren't in any.
All right, it's the
specific-
last one in the pile. Can we just grab the last one? No, or second to last one?
Did you go
Yeah.
through the region just at that moment?
No, so,
I may take the region.
no, we have a region one here. If you're under a time schedule, we can switch it. I just didn't want, we got so many pieces of paper, we'll get all confused.
I just wanted to know
I'll be back.
whether you guys are, your committee is looking for a formal presentation from the regional.
I think it will be
Capital
helpful,
Subcommittee.
yeah, I think, Michael, it'll be helpful for two purposes. One, for us to understand, but also another opportunity for the residents who are voting on this thing to address it. And separately, there's how you fund it with, under that IMA, that's a separate issue, okay?
So, who should be initiating the scheduling of that meeting?
That beautiful woman over there
Okay.
that tends to be quiet too often.
Because we
In this
have,
meeting,
we,
in this meeting, but not elsewhere.
we
You
have.
thought I was referring to you?
Sorry.
We have a dog and pony, and it's stopped in many places around here, so I want to make sure that you guys were not inadvertently.
Yeah, and again, we really have a big draw of an audience, so it's an opportunity to reach that audience.
It's your ratings.
The ratings, that's right. We've been putting on quite a show, huh, Paul? Jeez. All right, so you understand.
But
Right.
just as, off the starting block, I support the notion of these items. There is some specificity here that's listed.
So you
For the-
found it, Paul, you found this one for the region.
Yeah,
Oh, there it is.
21 projects, including exterior doors, a maintenance truck,
Yeah.
van for student transport, a tractor, flooring, ceiling work, restroom and locker room renovation, concrete work in front of the high school. So there is specificity here, and again, the same principle that leads me to support the Pine Hill projects would lead me to support this.
Yeah.
And I was the one last year who asked these projects to be done year by year rather than going in with a big ticket item and
And this-
asking the voters for millions of dollars.
As we will explain to you in our formal meeting on this that we can schedule, we have exhaustively looked at the earliest date and the latest date that these items should be worked on that were proposed for
So you
study.
identified the optimal
And
time period
We
to put it
have
in.
had the tendency to push it to the latest date.
Okay, which may or may not be the best thing.
Well, no.
You're comfortable with the latest date?
within being proven.
And the
So-
amount that's
So we
requested,
are not generally accelerating unless we saw there was a benefit to grouping
yeah,
a bunch of doors, projects in different buildings together, and that was driven from a contracting perspective.
and the amount that's listed here as requested is 362,000. That's the amount that the region would be acquiring versus the estimate of the town's portion of the amount.
Correct, that's the aggregate amount, and that's a high water
Okay.
mark at this point.
Okay, good.
So,
And you,
roughly speaking, we're
you
looking
you
at-
factored in the maintenance, that question that we talked about, that you're
Well-
and that's the bonding issue. So you understand the concern is that there may be, let's say, if you didn't weed out the maintenance items that aren't bondable, as an example.
So what we have weeded out, at least in, so here's an example. If you have a painting project that can't be done or is not smart to be done with your custodial staff over the summer because of scaffolding and
Yeah.
other issues,
Yeah.
and you go to an outside contractor and it's a $20,000 project, is that maintenance or is that a
No, you
capital
could-
investment?
you-
It's
Yeah,
not clear to me what.
No, off the top of my head, I can't answer that
Yeah.
question, but I remember looking at the detail. There were a number of the Pine Hill last year.
Well, I
There were a
can't see
number,
the Pine Hill.
but I think you had the same consultant prepare a similar type of a 20-year plan. And the point is that in the list of cost items, for Pine Hill, there were nearly $50,000 worth of non-bondable, non-capitalizable items, which were really maintenance. And the concern was that it might have slipped through the cracks.
So who
And-
could provide a written memo to the effect of helping us?
The treasurer can talk about what can be bondable or not. The
I'm
evaluation
more
of the capital policy.
Not the bondable piece, but what is capital versus what isn't?
Yeah, and that's the bylaws, 10,000, so if it has a useful life of 5 years or more, and it costs more than 10,000. So on the painting, you could say, in that $20,000 example, it exceeds the dollar amount, and you expect it to last 5 years. That's capitalizable, okay? You know, but if you're filling cracks in the sidewalk, and it's $350 to do cracks in the sidewalk, and they got down to that level of detail, it's not capitalizable, it's a maintenance item. And so you gotta capture that in the operating budget.
5,000 and
It's 10,000 and 5-year
5
life.
years.
Yeah. Okay, we can talk about that.
That-
further.
Yes, I
A
just
lot of
wanted,
details
Yeah.
on what
I don't
we're
think,
doing now.
and the good news is I don't think we have anything that everything is over 10,000 that we're bringing forward.
Yeah.
And I think everything would meet that
Yeah,
5-year.
okay.
life.
And on
But
the,
that's helpful, and I can bring it back because we have to measure with Dover's policy
Just
as well.
one suggestion here. The one thing that did bother me a little bit about the proposal was that the money was all going to be spent in fiscal year 19. And this is fiscal year 15. So there seemed to be a disconnect between saying, let's appropriate the money in fiscal.
might be a typo.
No, it's by what date will these be expended, not
Yes.
when it will be expended. So it looks like it'll be expended within the next 4
Some of the
years.
projects might be 3 or 4
I
years.
don't know whether there's language that's normally cloaks these things, that's the reason it's there. Everything we're talking, and we have FY 16, FY 17, FY 18, you know, it's like planes coming into Logan. You know, we need to take care of the FY 15 things because before we turn around, there's a whole nother slew of things the year. So I don't think there's the intent to ask for money for anything that wasn't going to be acted upon
It just
in the
says
next 12 months.
that it's going to be spent by fiscal.
So that's an open question.
Because that's a very technical piece, maybe one of you guys could communicate directly with the superintendent on that part. I can speak to the substance of the projects when
Yeah.
we have our time, because of the time I've spent with Ralph and Chris. But the drafting of the warrant definitely came out of.
All right, this also, that's fine, we'll clarify
But I can
that.
tell you, the
And
intent is
that's
everything-
that's a very good question
Yeah,
Paul asked.
we have not put anything on this that
No,
we're
we get it.
thinking, oh, we'll get
Yeah.
around to it in
Okay.
3 years' time.
So let me
That's
just say one
certainly-
last thing on this, because it's listed on the notice of intent, await determination on the intermunicipal agreement from the Sherborn BOS. And I've held off on that, I've been a bit of a slacker, I've told the superintendent, I apologize for being a slacker, but I have some questions that I'm gonna give to David to have us follow up to be sure, and then we'll bring the discussion forward. I just want to be sure we understand the unintended consequences that we keep addressing on that. We need to address on that.
At our meeting Tuesday night, a date was specified when you guys would be having that conversation amongst yourselves, and then there was the issue that you may be having it in executive session. But I thought.
I don't know.
got the
I don't know
sense
about that,
well, I'm just saying that that's what was.
I had told
reported
the
back to my
superintendent I'd
staff.
try to get to it first part, sometime between the end of the 13, and the first part, sometime in this month. So I emailed him yesterday. I know, he's a pushy guy.
Yeah.
He's a great guy, yes.
Type of guy, don't leave.
I just want to point that out. We're going to deal with it carefully. I have very important questions to be answered, knowledge to be gained for me personally to make a decision on that. I'm sure the other gentlemen here have also questions, but I'll be putting them forth to David, and we'll see if we can get answers to those
We're
questions.
falling behind on schedule.
I would encourage you, because we have to coordinate with another town,
Understand,
that's one
Understand.
helpful to
All right.
resolve sooner rather than later.
understand. Moving on to the notice of intent for the ladder truck. Okay, so this was in, it was out, it's in to put forth to the residents. I had a bunch of questions that I gave you back in November, so just details that will be useful for us to evaluate and the residents to evaluate the need. I don't need to have them answered today unless you want the.
Well, Chief Morrissey has he's been working on a document, and I had forwarded your questions to him to
Okay.
make sure that they're incorporated in the document or be prepared to answer them.
All right, but we,
So-
We're not doing
okay,
substantive
we're not
review.
doing a substantive review.
No, I understand that, but you did send stuff over to me, and I got it put together, so I'll give it.
Oh, yeah.
Excellent, we'll take
You
that.
can do with it, read
All
it
right.
tomorrow, next week.
No, but you'll be prepared so hopefully you haven't been waiting around just for that, but if you have, I'm sure you enjoyed it, the time you spent with us.
I always do.
But we'll have a formal
Right.
time slot on the agenda, and,
They're coming in on the
excellent.
23rd.
Oh, and I appreciate you answering, that's the type of information that's very useful. We never got it from the prior chief, I don't know why,
He was busy.
that's right, he was doing a full-time job at it at the time.
And we have other information.
Just
down the
kidding.
road, so.
Good, that's terrific, because you want, it's a big spend, it's a $900,000 number, and, so you have to, support the need and help the residents understand that need, and this information that you're providing, I'm sure will be very useful in that
Hey,
process.
Tim, one question, Chief, on on this write-up in terms of the cost and the number of miles and stuff. Is there useful life left in this, that you're gonna sell it to another organization, or sort of what happens to old fire trucks?
Likely, the common thing with old fire trucks currently is that a vendor will purchase the truck. They do minor repairs and such on it, and they have been going to South America or the Caribbean. And Chief McPherson could probably comment on his recent trip down south, that American fire trucks, old American fire trucks are where it shows up down there.
Sure, and so my reason for my question was whether the amount requested is net of any kind of purchase price or not.
Right, and as part of, like I say, a further discussion on this, that we'll have discussing financing options and such like that.
Great.
I can present you with some stuff that I've done some research on.
Okay, that would just be helpful.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yep.
Yeah,
There are a number of things that we've been talking about, such as you scan the market for demo units.
yes,
And
yeah.
So we kind of come out with
And-
a ballpark number that's an average.
And one of the important things is that it's a year and a half away or more
Yes.
before you can even get your hands on a
Oh,
new
yeah.
item.
Oh, yeah.
Even if we
Yeah.
signed the documents
Yeah.
today, you're
No, I
looking
get
at
that.
mid to late
Yeah,
15.
yeah. While you're here, where are we at with the HVAC? We approved 150 grand of HVAC. Where are we at with that?
It's going next week on Central Registry.
yeah, for
According
the
to,
the
the
HVAC.
designer.
Yeah.
The attic, the plan is to have that done by the end of the month. We're currently getting quotes
For
for
the
the attic
HVAC?
insulation.
Oh, that's a separate thing.
Well, it's
Right.
out of the same
So-
money.
No, I thought the insulation was the energy grant.
Part of the energy
Part of
grant
it
is
is.
paying some of it.
Okay.
And Chief, I had a question off topic here, and you circulated a really good report, monthly report, which David forwarded
Yeah.
to us. The hours estimate in that, what does
Right,
that
it's a
include?
lot of, true, I'll break that down next month.
Okay.
A little bit more narrower, because that also included some on-call time.
Okay, my perception was it had to be-
Right,
it had to include more than
correct.
just
And
incident
The ones I
response.
did before last
Okay.
month, December kind of got a little crazy with the holidays and everything, and I usually, if you've seen the ones previous,
Yeah, yeah.
I had them broken down to the more, the smaller groups.
Okay, that's fine. I was
all.
just hoping that was
It
right.
ju- Yeah, it was,
Okay.
more or less, we'll call it a typo for the
Yeah,
holidays.
That's fine, no criticism.
That's no
just question.
excuse. Yeah, Bob, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I heard an interesting idea this morning next door in regard to the ladder truck. Since this was in connection to the fact that Framingham is just down Western Avenue from me, and probably closer to a fair amount part of Sherborn than our own ladder truck. But it wasn't that, it was part of the issue where Framingham doesn't carry their own water. Somebody suggested as an idea, wouldn't it be a lot less expensive if we were to work some sort of a contract with Framingham where we paid to adapt one or two of their ladder trucks to hold water and then have them as our backup?
Okay, yes, sir. That's a great question, and I'll just say, one of the questions I had was, for the chief, was what are the alternative approaches to solve the need? For example, mutual aid, outsourcing, regionalization. Let me read you his response. Time is our enemy. This is our first piece of equipment into an incident because it is multifaceted. Space is often very tight with the homes in this town. This truck is a pumper, ladder truck, hose truck, tanker, and can throw ground ladders. Waiting for a neighboring town is not an option when fire grows exponentially every minute and lives may be at stake. So there's the written response to that type of a question, I think, but you've furthered it, and I think that's something further we'll have in the discussion. Yeah.
We
Yeah.
discussed that actually with Capital the other
Yeah.
evening.
In that scenario, you're talking about sending a Sherborn truck out to a house and then calling Framingham, radioing it, in a ladder truck that they would then be bringing, but you'd have your guys sitting there, and the most important thing was to vent out the roof. And that's time.
Conversation.
Yeah.
But realistically, again, what we're proposing here is a quint, it's really not a ladder truck, right? And Framingham has a ladder truck, so we're already somewhat dependent upon community.
This is a specialized truck which serves all these purposes that Tim had written.
It's
a
versus
hybrid.
a ladder versus a pumper.
Yeah.
And the importance here becomes, as Tim noted, the chief noted here, was the time. When we get to a house, for us to safely fight a fire, the goal of the ladder truck is to rescue people and also to ventilate a building to get rid of the hot gas and the smoke so we can work more effectively.
Yes,
So-
and safely.
And safely. So as that scene starts to mature and you get trucks on scene, it's harder to get those ladder trucks in to these locations. So when it comes to the water, just say you really can't retrofit a Framingham truck and add more water to it because then you start getting into weight issues and you're spending thousands and probably tens and twenties and thirties of
What
thousands
about
of
just a
dollars.
trailer, with a 10,000 gallon capacity?
Last point, which is.
So we'll get into that, but it's good that you're here, Neil, as well, to back up the chief here. One of the other pieces of information that will be useful, and I'm sure you have it, is the overall equipment that you have and the plan for that as time goes out. So we get some understanding of that, how this is one element of several pieces of equipment, all of which costs big dollars.
I would like to point out, that's why I had it in, I had kicked it out and talked to the chief, let's move this 1 year down. I was looking at it as a new request. Once I met with Capital Monday night, they were expecting it to be on the list.
Yes.
And then you have documents where this was all presented last year as part of the capital
This has been on the list, as
presentation.
you said before.
Yeah.
The picture plan
Yes.
is a
Yeah,
10-year
long before I
plan.
got here.
It's
Yeah.
been out there for years and years.
Yes, yeah, so that's just, we have to have that conversation again, because it's such a big number, but it's such an important piece of equipment, and the opportunity to educate people is always useful. So that's great, thank you for your time, for waiting, and always good to see you. I feel safe, especially right now with you guys, both you guys in this room. Wow, do I feel safe.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. We have police command vehicles, the next one I have in my pile, it's a 45,000. So we'll just need to understand what we're doing there.
Yeah, routinely, the police department funds one vehicle within their budget. This is,
A capital item that will last
capital item, new
longer
one,
and all
yeah.
that, yeah.
It says to be available and utilized during major emergent events. Is that the only time it would be used, or is the intent to have that be somebody's vehicle and then used
the
as
chief's
well?
vehicle would bump down, and this would become the chief's vehicle.
Okay, so it's
As
not,
far
it's
as-
not like we've got a $50,000 vehicle sitting around
No,
not used.
it's
And then the
his
que- and then-
vehicle.
and then the question is,
Right.
is there a more cost-effective way of getting what he needs?
Right, and he'll have to talk
That's
about
right.
that, but there is one vehicle over there right now that's not, that's sitting there unused, that basically, I believe his vehicle will be bumped down and replacing that one.
Okay.
So it's a
He
backup
has that
vehicle when
plan.
something goes down. He can explain all that. And we did get a command vehicle for Tim,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Last year. So we purchased, that, we must have that. I don't know what, I don't recall
Fire
seeing
chief
paid for
vehicle.
that, but I'm sure we did.
And the CM&D
CM&D guy,
vehicle.
yeah. And what did we do with the one we had before? Did we sell that?
Which,
I mean, wasn't Neil Neil drove around and,
That's still in use as far as I know.
yeah, there's one over there, yeah, that's,
so that's there for,
it's response, I don't know if it's the
The
assistant
response
chief
vehicle?
that's, has it,
Okay.
or, yeah.
so
But there is
somebody
a
may be
vehicle that's still
driving it
being used.
around, or, that's an offline.
It's
We'll
used
get
it,
into
because I see them responding with it.
Okay, gotcha. Next one, we have the Public Safety Committee. And this is, before you describe it, it's a little different than what I thought we were planning to do. I thought we were creating this, our objective is to create a Public Safety Committee.
Well, this is
Not-
incorrect of,
We're not
Should say renaming,
morphing
right?
traffic
right,
safety.
and I've corrected that on any document
It
that I've
should say
seen.
what?
It should not say renaming, it's not a renaming exercise. It's a new committee, I would think.
Yeah, no, so my point is that we're not changing the Traffic Safety Committee into the Public Safety Committee. They may be an element of it, and maybe you're morphing them into it, but it really is creating a Public Safety Committee that's more specific.
Right.
An element of which may be this traffic safety,
Right.
which might require bylaw change and so forth. I think that's
Right.
what we were thinking we were doing. Does that make sense to you,
Yes,
Mike?
that's exactly what I saw too.
Okay, so
Right.
we'll just clarify. All right.
Yep, and I think that that's what we had, I communicated to Mary that that's what the article
Perfect.
was. And
Perfect.
the checklist just says public safety. committee.
Okay, we have the transfer station paving where it's the additional $65,000
We've
to
talked
do
about
what
this
we've
at
talked
length,
about
yeah.
a variety of times, so that's all good, that's moving forward. Right to farm bylaw, I don't know what that is, again, that's agriculture.
Right
They'll
to farm
talk about
bylaw
that.
is it's adopted in a number of different places, and what it basically does is it puts people on notice that if there's a farm next to them, that farm has certain rights, including, the right to do things that they might not be doing at the time the person moves there.
So does this end up with its own bylaw, just like a general bylaw,
I think
wetland bylaw?
I don't know if you need a bylaw or if you're just adopting a state
Just
act on this, I'm not sure. But it really is it's a statement that the town is friendly to agriculture, and it's also a statement to people who may live near farming interests.
Yeah.
That the farms.
And
have
so
some
that's from
rights.
the Agriculture Advisory Commission, as the sponsor through us would be presumably what we're talking about.
Yeah, or I guess they could
Or
put
just
something
them.
directly on, right?
Yeah. But it's part of that whole, it kind of goes with one of the first ones we talked about in
Yes.
terms of that whole conversation.
The charge to the committee.
Yeah, okay.
What article are we talking about?
So we just passed off on the right to farm bylaw. We've gone through the police department command vehicle. We need more information, but we'll get that when we have our hearing. We talked about the the public safety committee, and that it needs some clarity of wording of what we're doing there versus what's in the NOI, Paul. And then we, transfer
I
station.
have real reservations about the public safety committee. I think we have a great traffic safety committee, they're doing a good job, and we have other committees that are doing a good job. And I think sometimes if you try to put too much onto one committee, you lose the focus.
Yeah, I think this is more an overarching group that's our subject matter experts principally, and our employees is what we've been talking about. And that this still allows for these other groups to continue in some fashion or other.
We'll have a chance to
onto that.
debate
We'll
the
deal with
merits
that,
anyway.
yeah,
It's got to be
yeah,
ironed out. I mean, it's.
yeah.
Yeah.
So we got a ways to
Just
go.
But I mean, Paul's
placeholder.
So
got
it's-
a valid position on it, and we just
Need
should
to have-
discuss that when we decide
That's right.
whether to sponsor it or how to recommend
Because
it.
it hasn't been discussed.
That's right.
Not in that sense.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
So that's good, you're sharing your concerns, because we'll factor those in. We talked about the transfer station, Paul, we've already been dealing with that, and this is just doing what we said we were gonna do months ago.
Yep.
The
Good
right
with
to
that.
farm bylaw will be part of the discussion we have with the Agricultural Advisory Committee.
Yep.
So that puts me to the town clerk's article to treat Saturdays as legal holidays. And so I don't understand what this is, but this is one of those where I wonder about unintended consequences as it might relate to union issues on Saturdays as holidays or personnel administration plan. And so, I mean, and I don't follow the example. So this is one where I look forward to getting smarter about what we're trying to do.
Is that something some of the towns you're familiar with have done, Paul?
No,
So I think there's some.
fairly unique.
Yeah, so where we're headed with that, I'm just not sure. And it looks like it's fairly specific to town clerk office operations perhaps. But if we do that, what does that mean for, our union guys and how they get paid, and for other folks and how they get paid and so forth.
And
So,
yeah, we'll have to have her explain it more, but I
Yeah.
thought it was to allow voting registration on Saturday, but I guess that simplifies it too much.
No, I think the origin of this is that we've had so many special elections, and when the state sets a special election, you take the date of election, and you have to work back as to when papers have to be submitted and when different deadlines are required for the candidates. But because a candidate has to submit, for example, nominating papers on a certain date, that means the town clerks have got to look at the signatures and make sure they're okay by the deadlines that are then follow from that. So this would allow that to be done on a Monday rather than on a Saturday, should that fall on a Saturday.
So the state law incorporates calendar days, not just
Not business
work
days.
weekdays.
Yeah.
business, yeah.
Yes, yeah.
All right, so we'll get a better
But
understanding.
it's not just state law, there's federal elections there
Yeah.
too,
Oh,
so.
Yeah.
There's Congress, there was a race for Congress, there was a race for the Senate.
Yeah, so here's the speed alert radar message sign. And, you know, the things and it's $10,000, but things I want to understand are, you know, how we use this and what the need is. One other thing is, it's described as, I don't know where I saw it. Oh, it's in need of immediate replacement. So the question is, how does something get so bad that it needs immediate replacement, you know, at this point in time? And the last the concern I have is, I read in there, it looks like it's going to take pictures. And I just wonder how that all works, particularly given the way I drive around town.
Well, and
I think-
the other question I think would be, this is a quote from a particular vendor, other competing systems, are we locked into this vendor? Is this the most cost-effective vendor?
You're
Et
not
cetera.
locked into that vendor, no.
And
No.
are there other systems that might be more cost-effective, not have some of the things that Peter's concerned about because of not wanting to be photographed speeding?
PD did research, and this is the vendor that they came up with that they wanted to
Uh-huh.
pursue for various reasons. They
Yeah.
could defend why, but
Yeah, so we'll
I think
learn
it's
about that.
would be a policy decision on whether that
On the-
camera is being,
Used
every
and how
time
it's
that the
used.
speed limit goes,
Right.
is exceeded, that it takes a picture.
Right, I want to know
We
more
do
about
not
that.
have a bylaw that allows us to take pictures and issue tickets.
Okay.
The Mass Turnpike does for people who go through the toll booths without paying. They take a picture and they send you a...
Yes, I know.
Are you one of those?
Wrong car, you know.
We don't have the law here to do that, so even if it took pictures, it wouldn't lead to a ticket.
Well, that's the stuff that we would, you know, in the discussion, we would learn more about. It's just like, oh, it's photographing. It's like, uh-oh.
But we can keep track of you.
Yeah.
There's Peter over there on Mill Street. Oh, he's made it over to South Main.
Right, different cars. All right, we have a change of the tax collector to town collector. I think it's clarity of enabling the tax collector to collect more than just taxes, but also is the concern of what we were doing before was that it stipulated that she must collect everything, and we're not going there, and so this has some contingency built into this.
Yeah, it says the article is contingent.
Yeah.
So
But
upon
she-
the success of other legislation.
Yeah, she's been working with the state on what, what sort of language could be put through that would allow
Yeah, and then
that
the other question
flexibility.
is there going to be something out of the warrant, the town reorganization committee that speaks to combining collector and treasurer?
That's
and
right.
Not on-
if- Not on this year? Okay.
So it'd be logical to deal with all of the issues with the tax collector at the same time.
That's what I'm thinking
right.
too,
Rather than
Paul.
piecemeal.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
And it's also maybe logical to pass something that's not contingent on later legislation. I mean, if the legislation moves, that's one thing, but it's a little difficult to pass something in anticipation of something that's not town rule legislation, town home
Yeah.
rule
I
legislation.
will say, I've been working with her to to try to do online collection of the farm pond stickers.
Fees, yeah.
And while she doesn't currently have any authority to do that, we've been trying to work out a system where she is pulling that stuff down and turning it over to the treasurer.
Okay.
But that's just one, it's a small thing, but if we started looking for opportunities of using that as a collector's office, of moving cash out of some other offices.
Yeah, like
Yeah,
transfer station.
But we
have to
don't
do
need this to do that. We could, because we run Farm Pond and we decide how the stuff is going to be
Collected, how it comes through.
collected, we can ask anyone to do it, and if she's willing to do it, it can be done.
Right, okay, so that's what we're,
It'd
doing.
be different if she was refusing to do it, and we wanted to make this change so that she had to do it.
Right.
But I wouldn't be in favor of forcing people to do things that they don't want to do. And if she's willing to do it, then we don't need this.
Okay.
Okay,
So,
good. Next one is just changing dog license fees, unlicensed dog fees to be conform with state fee levels, going from $25 to $50.
Let me ask a question on this, and it's not, we don't have to discuss it now, but it looks like the state statute says not less than $50. Does that mean we could say the fee is $200 or $100 or some other number that covers some of the costs of administering the
licensing regime?
I believe that it requires the selectmen to vote on setting the actual fee.
Yeah, so we might want to consider whether even $50 is a appropriate number.
So, I think that when we were looking at the fees we combined, we would, she would have to, I guess, make a recommendation.
This
for
isn't the
selectmen
license fee,
approval.
this is the fee.
They are
If you
unlicensed.
miss, despite all the warnings that the town clerk gives you, you missed the license date.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And this is amending the bylaw.
Yeah, I've been
to-
caught on that one too, by the way.
What I usually recommend to my towns is to never put a specific amount in the bylaw, instead to adopt the local option statute, which I think the town has adopted, but it's 4022F, which allows an elected board to set fees without regard to the state
Yeah.
statute monetary amount, understanding that the power to do so is limited by the Constitution. So it's not a tax, it's a fee that recovers costs. The idea behind adopting that statute is that as costs change, you can quickly do adjustments to your fees. Here, if we embed in a bylaw $50.
Well, it says not less than 50, so that's probably a good thing. It doesn't say you couldn't do more.
When you have a bylaw that says not less than $50 per violation, you can't use ticketing for that. That has to be a criminal complaint. The judge is gonna have to set.
Well, our bylaw now says not less than 25.
Yeah, it looks like the statute, according to this, the statute is not less than 50,
Right.
for whatever reason.
And our
And
bylaw
bylaws
says
add
not less
add
than
a-
25.
Right.
Right,
with
but
that.
if you're gonna put an amount in the unless you put a specific amount in the bylaw, you can't use the ticketing.
Yeah.
And I'm suggesting that that this isn't a good idea legally, because it can be done administratively and you get to the same result. But once you put anything in a bylaw,
Yeah.
you're stuck with whatever's in the bylaw.
Well,
So
so
we
we
gotta
have it in
figure
the
this out.
bylaw now, so
Right,
you
so it should
could
be
argue
repealed.
removing the bylaw, right?
Yes, take out $25 and say an amount to be set
Yeah.
by the town clerk with
Understood.
approval of the Board of Selectmen or the
Whatever, yeah.
Finance
Or
Committee.
just by the Board of Selectmen,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Good. I'll move along. Conservation Commission bylaw change. I don't know what exactly we're doing there, but it sounds like it's not a big deal in terms of number of words to be changed. Just, one of the things I'd want to understand is whether or not we're altering the rights of residents to challenge rulings and so forth. That's all.
Yeah, can we get the language on this one too, David, fairly
Yeah.
soon?
It's been, what I saw was changed.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so then we have a CM&D fuel management system upgrade of 21,000. I don't know what it is. I'd want to know. I'd want to know if there are ongoing maintenance costs, so just understand that better. Then we have a snow fighter dump truck. So I would have the same or very similar questions to the ones I raised on the fire truck for Ed. He needs to be prepared to come in on that. And likewise, I would hope that he also has a master equipment plan that says, here's what we got, here's how we use it, here's what's gonna die on us in year 6 and so forth. I think he has that.
This vehicle, I didn't have until the day that the warrant closed. The notice of intent came in.
Yeah.
Apparently, Capital Budget Committee knew about it a couple of weeks before.
I understand there's a larger amount now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
my first gut was, once I saw that the amount had changed even after the warrant had closed, I said, I'm not touching it. So the actual amount's around 175.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
So,
It's a big number.
It's a big number for a big truck that, but the conversation, I mean, we may say, we don't support this, but I think what's valuable is to have the conversation of the need and the overall equipment plan.
And what do you
because-
do if you don't have it? What's the
Yeah.
alternative? Would you contract with a contractor on the 4 days a year you need a truck that big? Or is it something you're using 300 days a year and you need it all the time? I don't
That's
know.
right. Yeah, yeah. And to that point, also a better understanding of how we are using contractors versus our own equipment, because
Right.
whether, and has there been a trend that we're using them more, or trend that we're using the same, they're doing the same amount of work, maybe their rates have gone up, and the rates vary and so forth. But just all that understanding would be valuable to
So they're
have
coming in on the
that conversation.
23rd.
Okay.
And I hope, that night we can actually,
Cover
discuss
that
their budget,
ground.
because there are a number of things with CM&D, like, the use of stormwater funds we need to talk about. and,
Yeah.
The GIS system.
And we had some questions about staffing and scheduling and storm events and things like that.
That's right.
too.
And I've asked
Yeah.
about those.
Yeah, and I put on our warrant thing, I'll sit down with you next week and
Okay.
just sort of talk.
So,
Help make me smarter about how things work on some of this.
I didn't allow any update of this notice of intent. You want to just make a note that the actual is
175. I did,
175?
yeah.
And then I'll update that amount on the checklist.
Good. All right, I'm gonna go to the non-recommended, and then I'll go to the housekeeping one that Diane just gave us before the meeting. All right, just to talk briefly about this. We got a traffic light upgrade for 75 to 100,000 bucks. The questions I would have, why we think we need, Ed thinks we need it, now we've decided we don't need it.
Well, the
And-
controller's 15 years old, 20 years old or something. It's
Yeah.
going to have to be updated at some point, and that includes updating the controller. That's the box on the side of the road,
Yeah.
and all of the equipment.
Yeah.
So it does have a huge price tag.
Would you
and-
update it in a way, would it be updated in a way that would be sensitive to whether there were vehicles queued up in any of the directions? One of the things I noticed about that is particularly off hours, evening hours,
Yeah.
or sometimes midday hours, you can wait at that light even though there's nobody coming the other
Right.
direction. A lot of places have replaced those kinds of lights with ones that are more
Yeah.
sensitive to who's.
And you can do that
right up
without,
there.
putting plates in the road or whatever. You can put have you seen the
Sensor
poles
kinda
with the
things.
camera?
Yeah.
Looking down, that senses the.
Yeah.
And there's no
traffic
chapter
flow.
90, that's not a chapter 90 type of item, right? Because that's road surface.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
yeah. So,
And it's not a state thing, we own that light basically. is what
right,
it is.
right. So given the other requests, and it's not that it's dead, it's just an improvement, so
I think
I
Susan
moved
had
it
a
to-
question too.
I moved it to next
Okay.
year.
I just want to say, as far as the traffic light, the other issue with the controller box there, that's at the area the Disability Advisory Committee has had great concerns, because the sidewalk, in order to get to the button to push for the pedestrian crossing light there, you've got to go out into the
Gotta
road.
go around.
Because of that box is there. So there's a issue from the Disability Advisory Committee is behind this, and also Traffic Safety Committee. At the same time, we'd like to see the crosswalks
Yeah.
addressed there. So it's not just a matter of the light being old, it's the whole location.
So I don't have any estimates on that. The number's bounced around.
Yeah,
so
75 to 100, who knows what it is. and all
You know,
that.
it's-
Yeah.
are we extending the sidewalk up there? Is that part of the sidewalk, phase 2 of the sidewalk project?
On the east side of North Main Street,
Yes.
supposed to
Yes.
be extending.
Right, so at some point, that issue will come into play with the sidewalk. I wonder if that's a time to
Right.
maybe
Do it
move
all
back to
together.
this discussion.
We have a grant application pending for part of the sidewalk. What's the status of that?
That was the grant submitted by Gino.
Yes,
Yeah, I believe that we didn't get that.
okay, but we still have that on the list of things
Right.
to work on.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Ed still has it on the list, but that, I don't think we had anything approved under that round of grants.
Well, I'd love to build a sidewalk, if I can get some support for building
Me
this.
too.
Mr. Sidewalk.
We're on the same page
Mr.
there.
Sidewalk, yeah. Town codification of the bylaws,
I think that's something that's been kicked around for a number of years. Carol and I talked about it. It's something that'll probably have to be done at some point, whether it's this year. There's nothing saying that it has to be this year, next year, or the year after.
and it's a
David, is this to use a
$12,000
muni law or one of those services to codify it? I mean, what most municipalities tend to do now when they codify, and Dover's done this, is they go to one of the online services, and that's how they codify it.
Okay. I haven't done any research on
Attached
You may
it.
want to
to
talk
that
to
is-
Dover and see what they did and how they did it. All of theirs is codified.
Code Publishing is what,
Yeah, but and there are other vendors too, but I was, you know, you can look in, smaller towns don't tend to do it, but Dover is one that did, and
Yeah.
I'm not sure how recently, but you might get some info from their town administrator on that.
I know that,
Just what is it, what purpose does this serve beyond
Like-
what we already do?
I guess it just cleans up the amount of records. I mean, for instance, I had a bylaw that I was researching, and then I came up with a bunch of changes to it, and then found out it wasn't the book I had wasn't,
Oh, you had a superseded book.
wasn't
Oops.
updated.
but see, right now, the town clerk's office is supposed to update that book and keep it available for the public.
Yeah, and you know, we should have more resources online. I mean, that's part of it. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be done this year, but in
So that's really what it is,
many
is
well-run
principally
towns,
putting it
you're able to
online?
get an accurate current copy of not just a zoning bylaw, but a general bylaw and regulations for the Board of Health and the Conservation Commission by going to a code service online that the town has contracted with.
So does it add a more accurate number to each section of the
Yeah, they,
bylaw, like
right,
1.2?
they might, yeah, they might reorganize it so it's codified, they keep the same laws, but they renumber them, and you can click on a section and it expands, and
Okay, to
go
see
on
it.
Dover's website and look at how they've done
All
their,
right.
their
So-
code.
But for a small town like Sherborn, spending $12,000 on that, while it definitely would be an improvement, it just seems like in the face of everything else that we're
Right, no,
dealing with this
agreed,
year.
or you figure out a way to fund it through fees of, you know,
Yeah.
permit fees or something else, but yeah.
From what I understand,
This
this
is
was
my system.
something
Carry
from the clerk and planning has wanted to see happen at some point.
And I think it's just a question of sort of good municipal administration if we can do it.
You just codify.
No, I hear you. Okay, that's good. What else do we have? Personnel, admin, change in title of stuff here. Okay, so that's stuff we're not, I don't know what we were trying to do, but it
On
doesn't
which
sound
one?
like it's urgent. It's the change in the personnel administration plan, section 7 for sick pay and related absences. So that was consideration of some clarity there, of stuff we've been.
Yeah, I was going to go to the personnel board and change the personnel admin plan, and then I just said, well, I'll address the problem and come up with my own thing to implement, and
Okay.
Yeah.
it has the same effect.
Yeah, gotcha. We had replacement of carpet. So in this, what you've pulled this as a capital item, and it's a $10,000 item, and you're saying that you'll do it out of the building budget. Just like we're doing out of the building budget, the grant, the balance of the grant for the automatic doors at some point, next week we'll talk about that, right?
Yeah.
But, so the question, bless you, the question is, we had a budget for building maintenance, and basically we're saying we have available funds, and we're gonna take a chunk of it to spend on, in this fiscal year, on the door stuff, and next fiscal year on this stuff, we're not really altering the budget. We aren't getting to the budget discussion
Right.
quite yet, but, you know, so we've identified a use of that, which otherwise, had we not used it for this, we'd see a turn back. So
Right.
it's still spending the people's money, it's just
Right.
spending it through the budget.
Similar to the same thing that we did with the listening device, where that was towards the end of the year, we
Money
saw that
there
there was
to
gonna
do.
be some money for
Okay.
facilities, and we allocated
Yeah,
it to there.
I just,
Here, the carpet needs to be done. When we actually move the chairs out of the way. You
no,
may
there's a
not-
big stain right there, Paul.
Our viewers may not be able to see it on the cameras, but when you move the chairs out of the way, you can see that there's coffee stains, there are all kinds of,
No.
It's not even the stains that we've had it cleaned, but the seams are coming apart.
I'm not.
And people can trip on it.
Becomes a liability
The point
issue.
I make, yeah, I'm not concerned, you know, I'm not questioning the need to do that. It's that we have this maintenance budget for doing maintenance of buildings. And all of a sudden, we've pulled a big slug of that maintenance, but I don't know what the number is for the maintenance budget. But we pulled a slug out that arguably could be a capital item. And otherwise, we may not have spent, or we might have been able to use on other maintenance. For example, somebody could say, well, the front hall needs painting or something, and we're not doing that because we don't have the money, because we spent it on the carpet. You follow, that's the discussion to,
Right, well, that's,
to have.
like I asked about bringing somebody in to check out some things and actually come up with that whole maintenance capital plan for
Yes.
each building.
Yeah, I
And
like
that's taking
that.
time, and we did start on that.
Oh, good.
But this one was already out of the gate with the carpeting.
And we have
I think
the
it's been
room, is what
talked
you're
about
saying.
for a year.
Yeah, okay, good enough. Collection system replacement, this is the tax collector, she's, I guess, decided to pull that, where she's using 10-year-old computers, she doesn't know what she wants.
I think she's still going to do the upgrade, but it's the same thing, where she's going to absorb it within her budget. And I think she
Yeah.
discussed that with advisory.
Yeah. We,
Okay.
pull it, yeah,
Pull it, but put it in her budget.
I see. Okay,
Pull it
good,
as capital.
understood. All right, we have a placeholder that we originally had for special act authorizing you to sign the warrant. We're deferring, I guess, to the other guys' committee.
Yeah.
And we're deferring that for what?
The task force group, the governance task force.
On this issue? Will they include this issue in their recommendation?
They're
don't know.
addressing it, we don't know what they're gonna recommend.
All right, so here's my question on that. This is something we know we want.
Yes.
So whether they recommend it or not, I think it should be in the warrant, and that's A. And B, I am concerned that this task force is proposing to have a single warrant article, because my understanding is they're looking at several different kinds of changes, and I'm concerned we get into the same situation we were in last year, where, you know, half the people might agree with change A and half the people might agree with change B, but, you know, only a quarter of the people agree with both A and B, and as a result, you don't get any place. And I wonder if that's their request, or we've decided to organize it that way for convenience sake. I would want to know a little more about that, and I'd be open to the idea of actually, if they've got 3 different types of proposals, having them have 3 different warrant articles.
I've been assured that this piece is being addressed. The specific piece about the warrant signing.
If it's not addressed, or if it's lumped in with a bunch of controversial stuff,
We can-
I'd still like to see us pull it out and
do
have
it.
a separate article.
We can still do it.
You could,
We can decide to do it
can
whatever we
always-
want,
We
right?
can always do that. If they produce an article that has, 20 sections to it,
And this is one of them, yeah.
this is one of them, that's one thing. If it's not included, the fact that it's in the stack entitled not recommended, I don't see that today's discussion
I
is
agree with you. I
final.
just want to be clear on that.
Yeah.
That's
those
how I
were,
feel about this,
yeah, it's
yeah.
something that we put in originally, but I wasn't recommending going forward, including on the warrant, because I've been assured that that's being addressed.
I get it, I
Yeah,
just
yeah.
remember last year, as I'm sure
Right.
you all do, and if you get a warrant article with 15 different changes to town government, and this is one of them, A, it could get lost in the shuffle, B, the whole thing could collapse because there's 1 or 2 points that people are upset about, and the whole thing goes away.
From what I understand, I think there are only 2 or 3 clear items that are coming out. I don't think
Right.
there's a laundry list like we were looking at last year. So it's you probably could easily address it if it wasn't satisfactory, by a change in the motion.
Yeah.
Like recommending a
Yeah.
different.
All right, I'd still probably like a separate warrant article, just so we have that opportunity.
Make sure, and we can do that, so.
All right, we're on to the
All right,
next thing,
good.
huh?
So we have housekeeping articles that we were handed, and just flipping through those and giving Mary's here. One was the OPEB stabilization fund. Oh,
Before we move on, do you want me to go ahead and put that in the checklist, that it's a Board of Selectmen placeholder for?
I don't think it matters right now.
Yeah, I don't think, and I look at your checklist
Just keep
as a
it in there.
tool
Right.
for tracking all this stuff versus,
Right.
the end result.
Right.
So I think we're good there. The OPEB stabilization fund, and the last one in this pile is the stabilization fund, whether to fund either of those. And one of the questions that we'll be dealing with at some point is whether do we take money out of the OPEB stabilization fund to fund the fund itself, that's been, the trust fund. And so there's no article on that, but the wording of one of these can be altered to, so where we have the OPEB stabilization fund one, we could call it the trust fund one or something,
Right.
right? Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, and it's also not just moving funds.
No,
from
it's,
current
we are
reserve-
appropriating, your budget appropriates,
appropriating,
yes.
But it may be both.
That's right.
It may be
Right.
or neither,
So-
or,
So between these two articles, there may be wording changes to reflect the flexibility that we're talking about.
As long as you have, you know, a holder article in there for money going into the trust fund and money going into the OPEB.
But we don't have a holder for the money going into the trust fund, so we'd all have to alter the,
You do, for the stabilization fund.
There's a, it's, okay,
No.
there's a.
that's where I
Okay.
get confused.
Okay, so there, what this should be, okay, and you can decide if that's what we actually have, is an article to put the appropriation into
Yeah, no.
the the stabilization fund that we've been putting the OPEB monies into for the last few
But that
years.
is a specific OPEB, we have two stabilization funds. One is OPEB specific.
That's
The
correct.
third vehicle is the OPEB trust
I
fund
know
that the
that.
town created.
Well, no, but the OPEB,
No.
you really have
Yes.
you have the stabilization fund and you have the OPEB trust fund.
And we have the OPEB stabilization.
Station.
But that's within the stabilization fund.
Okay, if you say so, that's
Yeah.
not my my
Okay,
understanding.
I was not clear on that as
Yeah.
well.
You have-
I know we have a general stabilization fund.
When you have one, you have a stabilization fund, and then you have breakouts underneath that stabilization fund for, I mean, you could have 10 different stabilization funds identified within that stabilization.
In fact, I mean, that's what.
Okay, all right, we'll clear that up. You see what I mean? We have three
do.
vehicles.
Right.
And one we put no money in, two we've got money in. One is the OPEB stabilization fund. And that's where we've put money from free cash in the past, and then just last year put appropriations
That is
or,
correct.
you know, budgeted money in.
Correct.
This year we're creating budgeted money, and the question is where we put it, whether we put it in the trust fund, what the amount is, and also whether we take money out of the OPEB stabilization fund and put it into that trust fund. And to do that would require 2/3 approval at town meeting.
And also, if we decide not to, the town, you know, when I we, I mean whoever, decides not to put it into the trust fund, to
Understood.
still be able to put it into
OPEB stabilization, yeah. And that's stuff that advisory will be wrestling with, working with the treasurer, and then, you know, we'll certainly weigh in. Good.
And I'll double check that with Ruth, but what I've seen in most towns, it's you make a contribution to the stabilization fund for the purpose of OPEB, and then it gets sub-accounted
Yeah.
as under the stabilization
Check that,
fund.
because that's, I really didn't have
Yeah.
that clarity of understanding on that, you know? I thought we created this separate thing.
I was under the same impression that you were.
Yeah. So anyway, so the other stuff is revolving supplemental, chapter 90, unpaid bills, the usual suspects, annual town report, improvement embellishment of cemeteries, and that's all good stuff. Okay? Good. So we're there. We've moved through that. On the, so I think we're good on that portion of the agenda, which took us a little longer, but I think it was well worth it. On the budget and warrant planning, well, we did the warrant planning. On the budget and model review, here's the only, I was hoping we might have something today, and we don't, and that's okay, we'll get to it. And we have certainly some good scheduling. So for example, next week, we're dealing with the Council on Aging and Conservation for their budget review as well as their warrant article. But the point, one of the points that I just, you know, I look back and I pulled out my budget book, which I used to prop up the corner of a desk from last year. And so last year, when we didn't have a town administrator, and it was only just the two of us, Paul and I were up here, and Diane, so it's the good and the bad, but I'm just pointing it out, and probably not bad, it's not really I'm saying it bad, but it was last year, Saturday, January 5th, we did our all-day dog and pony show, and we had a model, we had the budgets, we had the budget books, and we reviewed things in great detail on that day. So, and we had a town meeting, which was on May 4th, I think it was. This year, we've got an April 29th town meeting, and now we're, you know, a week or so later in the process. But the process, and so I'm just talking it through, but the process, the beauty of the process is we have you doing a lot of the legwork that we got stuck doing last year. So
I'm
I
not
think
sure.
the end result will get to a smoother.
I mean, I'm not sure what we did last year, but we did look at, you know, how the calendar would lay out. And I guess the town accountant in the bylaw has to have those budgets by December
that's-
31st.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until today that the CM&D budget was acceptable.
I see.
So
No, but
it
so
bounced
that's the
around.
point. You've been vetting a lot of this stuff that we
Well, actually,
hadn't.
I couldn't do as much as I had hoped to, because if a quarter of the budget just got nailed down today, it's hard to go figure out what you're going to do with the other ones, not knowing how that one is changing.
I understand.
So now I'm doing the same thing. I'm doing my own model, because the town accountant's model isn't ready yet.
Isn't ready yet.
So,
Well, so I'm just a little leery that we're gonna get bitten in the hindquarters, but I'm taking comfort knowing that you've been doing a lot of legwork, you've been meeting with the budget makers, you've been doing all of this stuff, and that's part of the whole.
yeah, I mean, I can see that you'd have some anxiety. I think Mary and I in the capital budget had some anxiety too, but I think we've been working it through, and we're all moving in the same direction.
Yeah.
So advisory has a schedule laid out of when they're reviewing each budget.
And they're reviewing our budgets on the 5th of
February 5th.
February, so that our schedule allows for all that, that's
Yeah,
good.
and we'll be moving those that we don't expect much discussion to the week before or the week after.
Yeah,
David, could you circulate a schedule of all the dates for those reviews, et cetera? Is this
there's
right?
one in the
there.
pile in like
Ah,
the
okay.
second,
Okay, good.
right at the very
I've
top.
got it added to,
Excellent.
last night,
Right
added
there.
a few.
Planning board got
perfect.
added.
Thank you. Yeah, okay, missed this. Very good, thanks.
I'll resend this to you.
With updated information,
Yeah, because
yeah.
I actually
Okay.
added planning last night and I added
Great.
elder housing, so.
All right, so we know that covers our upcoming meeting topics as well. I think
Good.
we'll add I'm hoping we'll see the model for next Thursday's meeting. That gives us a big picture.
I heard from Ruth that she would have it, no problem, for us, for our meeting on the 22nd, because she was going to be providing it to you people significantly ahead of that, so.
Yeah, no,
That was just by way of comment, that,
Yeah, what I'm looking for in the model is based on what's been submitted by 12/31, well, maybe a laggard or two, but whatever we've got in the hopper at this point, what does that show us on the model?
think we're-
It's a very first pass.
I think we're like
a couple of days away.
2 days, yeah,
Yeah,
2 or 3
so,
days.
so we
away.
should have that for next
Yeah.
Thursday night's meeting,
Yeah.
is what I really
And
would
free
hope
cash
for.
Department
Or
of
I'll make
Revenue
it up.
told me that it would, we should have the true certification of the free cash by
Which is
Wednesday.
huge, yeah, that's huge.
Great.
Yeah, great, thank you.
random but related comment on that is that one of the reasons that, when I was trying to schedule some people to come in this past Wednesday.
Yeah.
To present to us budgets. And a couple of people were not able to do that because weather had prevented their committees. These were not town departments, well, sort of, but, they're elected committees and so forth, to approve their budget because their meeting had been canceled. And so there's an issue sometimes with that. If something comes up that the group that's really presenting the budget can't approve it by December 31st because they don't meet, then you get to when their next meeting is. And so that's just another thing to sort of keep in the back of your minds if you're thinking of making any changes or, working with advisory next year when we're setting up the dates for the, closing of the warrant and that sort of thing, just to sort of keep that back of our
Yeah.
minds.
Yeah. Well, just one of the other things which I'm not making very good friends with Ruth, our poor favorite town accountant, but I'm being a stickler about one particular thing, which is we write checks to these for tuitions for out-of-district schools. And I asked her to provide a reconciliation, which she did a first pass at. And it may be complete and accurate, but I question it, so I have a number of questions, so I've pushed it back to her. Now, she's very busy, so she hasn't come back with it, but what this reconciliation shows, just for the out-of-district regional school-age children, this current year is a $550,000 surplus. And that's a huge, that's a big number. So I'm just hoping that she made a mistake. Well, I'm hoping she didn't make a mistake, but it has ramifications for how we look at things going forward in terms of how we anticipate circuit breaker monies and all that kind of stuff. So I just point that out. I can share you the reconciliation she did and the information the questions I still have, and hopefully she'll come back. But I am being a stickler, and I'm sure she's not too happy with that.
Well, I'm sure she actually, my guess would be that she's happy to have it correct. I mean.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And so with the missing elements are Pine Hill student out of district and related circuit breaker monies. Compare that to what we budget, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
So,
we've had people move out, we've had people age out.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
you can anticipate the aging out, but you can't anticipate the moving out.
Right,
So.
right. So that's either a big windfall, or, I mean, we typically get some kind of windfall, but that's a substantially larger windfall.
Yeah, some of the OD that has been through grade 5, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Is going to shift from that to in-school.
I understand, and that's how they
increases
explain
at the
their
region.
budget increases and all
so,
that, yeah.
some of
I get
that's
that, okay. And we'll be, get smarter about it.
And we did have the auditor in this week, that's another piece too.
Yeah,
that
so there's a
we're
lot.
badgering him, I mean, I hate developing a budget for next year and you still haven't seen
Right.
draft financial
Yeah.
statements
You're
from the previous year.
Preaching
but
to the
they're-
choir on that one.
Yeah,
Yeah, so that's good. Well, I think we're getting a draft soon, is what.
Yeah,
what,
right, right.
Is report, that's terrific.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
very good. That's good. And the other thing, we have a GASB 34 report that we got in November, and I wrote in my notes, I really would love to get my hands on that.
45?
Or 45, whatever it is, yeah, the OPEB report with the new group, so
Right.
that would be useful to have very
That
sooner than later.
Makes two of us as well.
Yeah, okay, good. All right, so then we have appointment of Ellen Heffron as an associate member of the Farm Pond Advisory Committee.
So moved.
Expiring
Second.
6/15/14. Any discussion? All in favor? Great, thanks. I'll accept a motion for approval of the minutes of
So moved.
10/24/13. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion to
Okay.
adjourn.
I'll accept approval of the warrant.
didn't approve the warrant yet. You're right.
Warrant
That's
number
important.
28 in the amount of $1,017,934.71.
So moved.
All in favor? Great. Sign this, and then I'll take the motion to.
I was just one ahead.
You've already made that motion. I'll second the adjournment motion. And once Paul signs this, I'll ask for a vote on that. And thank you all for your participation. Thanks for pulling all this information together, David, Diane.
Yeah, we got through a lot
I
of
think
stuff today.
we're way ahead of the game on all this warrant article stuff. So it's been moved and seconded to adjourn. All in favor?
All right, great.
Thanks, gents.
everybody.
Good job. Thanks for staying and